Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Linda Cooney. On June 28, 2011, at approximately 8:30 a.m., Linda Cooney called the Las Vegas police. She was in a panic, reporting that her son Kevin had been shot in the neck and needed immediate help. When police and an ambulance arrived at their home, they found Kevin Cooney, 30, lying on the living room floor, bleeding. They quickly provided him with medical assistance. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they found several unusual details. Ammunition and weapons were scattered across the floor, which was not typical. They determined that the Kevin had been shot with Linda's pistol, but she could not identify who fired the weapon. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, and nothing appeared to be stolen, so they ruled out robbery as a motive. Linda was 63 years old at the time. She remained calm during the police interrogation. The interrogation lasted about an hour and was recorded. Linda insisted that she did not know who shot her son and denied any involvement, despite pressure from the police. When the police arrived, Kevin only had time to say that the shooting was an accident before he lost consciousness. He was rushed to the nearest medical center. Fortunately, Kevin survived, but his condition was serious and he would need a long time to recover. Linda's interrogation is ongoing. Police believe Kevin may have wanted to end his life. When Linda was questioned about this, she stated that he had tried to do so before. This situation required further investigation, and it was later revealed that there were more disturbing details involved in the case. During the investigation, it was discovered that a similar tragic shooting had occurred in the family 19 years earlier. Linda reported that Kevin had gone through a troubled adolescence, which had worsened after the death of his father. She informed the police that Kevin had repeatedly threatened to end his life. Even as an adult, Kevin continued to exhibit unstable behavior. Linda recounted an incident just hours before the shooting, at approximately 1 a.m. on June 28, 2011, when Kevin attacked her after an argument. He suddenly turned a corner and struck her in the chest, knocking her to the floor. She showed the police a large bruise as evidence of the attack, saying that Kevin had expressed a desire to kill her. After the fight, Linda went to bed. At the time, only Linda and Kevin were home, as her youngest son was away on a business trip. The conflict with Kevin began because of his relationship with a girl named Karina Taylor. Linda described Kevin as emotionally unstable and Karina as unpredictable, which led to frequent arguments. She said that these conflicts were common and that she was used to them. The next morning, Linda woke up and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. In the living room, she found Kevin lying on the floor with a gunshot wound. He was still alive. However, strangely, Linda said that she did not hear the gunshot. Experienced police sensed deception from the start. It appeared that Linda was trying to conceal what happened that night. She was careful with her words, while the Kevin was unconscious and there were no other witnesses for the police. So they decided to test the only piece of evidence, a .357 Magnum pistol used in the shooting. They knew the gun belonged to Linda. What is even more astonishing is that 10 years ago, Kevin's father, Jim, was shot with this gun in Palm Beach, Florida. Police investigated the case and learned that Linda had been acquitted of murdering her husband, after which Linda tried to reclaim the gun, claiming that she needed it for self-defense. She eventually succeeded in getting it back. The police try to find some similarities between Jim's and Kevin's cases that might support the idea that Linda tried to kill her son. They may even consider re-examining the first crime. Meanwhile, the police talked to family members. Jim's brother, Bob, believes that Linda intentionally shot both cases. He never trusted Linda, but there was nothing he could do to protect his family from harm. Bob was the eldest child in a wealthy and large family. As Jim grew up, he became a successful lawyer and made a good living. The family originally came from Palm Beach, while Linda was from the Midwest, where her parents owned a small family farm in Wisconsin. Jim and Linda met at a party, and after a brief encounter, he fell in love with her beautiful brunette. However, Bob is skeptical about Linda. He finds it strange that she works as a secretary at a law firm and is involved in questionable activities. That Jim was deeply in love with her, so he ignored his family's objections and married Linda in 1979. Together, they went on to have 2 sons. Linda had 2 children, Kevin, born in 1981, and Christopher, born later. However, their marriage was not a happy one. Linda accused her husband, Jim, of being abusive. Over time, their relationship deteriorated, leading Linda to report Jim to the police for assault. However, she was unable to produce any evidence or testimony to support her claims. There were no obvious signs of abuse, and many people found it hard to believe that someone as respected and decent as Jim could harm his wife. After facing accusations that damaged his reputation, Jim decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, the children continued to live with Linda in Jim's large house, while Jim had to pay child support. However, Linda was still unhappy and tried to get more money out of Jim. Meanwhile, Jim wanted to spend more time with the children, but if he did not pay her in advance, the children would not be home when he visited. According to Bob, each visit cost Jim $500, a large sum at the time. Jim became increasingly frustrated when he realized that Linda was taking advantage of the situation and blackmailing him. Jim, an attorney, chose to follow the law. On February 7, 1992, he visited his children, not with cash as he had done before, but by court order. The court ruled that Linda had to allow the children to communicate with their father. Unfortunately, during this visit, Linda shot him, resulting in his tragic death. Family members believe that she was angry that he refused to provide financial support because she had previously relied on her ex-husband while not working. In a fit of rage, she shot Jim and then called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they found Jim lying on his back in a pool of blood. He was holding a kitchen knife in his right hand, and he had died from multiple gunshot wounds. Linda shot her ex-husband at close range but claimed it was self-defense. She stated that Jim attacked her with a knife, leaving her no option but to shoot him. However, police were doubtful because Linda had no injuries at all. There wasn't a single scratch on her body. This led to questions about whether Jim had actually attacked her and what his motive might have been. In the end, Linda's account was not believed, and she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The key witness in the case was her son, Kevin Cooney, who witnessed the murder of his father. He was called in to testify. On that tragic day, younger brother, 8-year-old Christopher, was hiding in a closet and couldn't see the events unfold. Kevin, however, was in the bedroom with the door open to the kitchen, where his parents were arguing. He watched through. He looked through the crack in the door. Kevin remembered feeling terrified and anxious. He was frozen in place, unable to move, when he saw what had happened. Kevin reported that before the shooting started, he saw his father holding a shiny object, but he couldn't identify it clearly. He thought it looked like a knife, but it might have also been a key or something similar. After the shooting, when he left the room, he noticed his father no longer had anything in his hand. It was only after the shooting ended that a knife appeared in his father's hand. When the police arrived, they suspected Linda had staged a self-defense scenario by placing the knife in Jim's hand. Linda had a strong motive for this action because her husband's sons would inherit his money upon his death. Her children would benefit from Jim Cooney's life insurance policy, worth $1 million, which, along with his considerable estate, would be passed on to his children. However, the most compelling evidence the police uncovered was not Linda's call to the police, but her phone records. They discovered that before calling 911, she had contacted her lawyer first, possibly to seek legal advice. During the 9-to-1 conversation, Linda made several verbal errors, possibly due to confusion. She asked for backup and claimed that her ex-husband was trying to stab her, despite having previously said that she had shot him and that he appeared to be dead. The police were certain that Jim was dead before she called her lawyer, and she only contacted the police afterwards. It is also feared that, before her arrest, Linda had convinced Kevin that the knife had been in his father's possession the entire time. During the trial, Kevin testified that he saw an object in his father's hands. In 1993, 11-year-old Kevin took the stand as a witness. He spoke with a stutter due to fear and held a small toy. Although his testimony was somewhat confusing, it was convincing enough for the jury to quickly acquit Linda Cooney, leading to her release from the courtroom. Clearly, Kevin's testimony played a crucial role in her defense. Afterwards, she gave an interview to numerous media outlets, describing her ex-husband as a typical abuser. She maintained that she was not a murderer but acted in self-defense. To protect herself and her children, some people supported her. However, most Palm Beach residents who knew Linda's family did not believe her explanation. Because of Jim's calm and non-confrontational nature, the locals looked down on her and assumed she was the murderer. As a result, Linda could not stay there long due to the public backlash and the potential for conflict. After receiving financial support, she packed her children and moved to Las Vegas. She wanted to start a new life somewhere where no one would recognize her. 2 decades later, the heartbreaking incident occurred again. It involved the same .357 Magnum pistol that was used to shoot the family's father, Jim. Kevin Cooney is now recovering in the hospital. Initially, he was unconscious and partially paralyzed. He was unable to provide a clear account of the events of that tragic night. When Kevin woke up in the hospital 3 days later, his first words were, "No, Mom, I'm afraid of Mom." Mom shot on. He immediately told several nurses about this and seemed genuinely scared. It was clear he feared that his mother would come back to harm him again. His statements were serious, indicating that he was not joking. Kevin's girlfriend, Karina Taylor, was not surprised by his words. She said she lived in fear of his mother during their 2-year relationship. Their relationship began in 2009. Karina stated that Kevin had a constant fear of his mother, who reacted harshly whenever he had a girlfriend. Linda had previously frightened off all of Kevin's girlfriends, but Karina was determined and not intimidated by Kevin's mother's angry expressions. From their initial interactions, Karina developed a negative view of Linda, finding her to be erratic and aggressive. Linda bluntly tells Karina that Karina's family will never accept her and advises her to stay away from Kevin. And Linda ominously implies that she always carries a gun for self-defense. This makes Karina realize that it is best not to confront Linda, causing her to secretly meet Kevin out of fear for her safety. Kevin's previous girlfriends share similar concerns. 1. Clarita Candle believes Kevin's mother is a serious threat, as Linda has threatened her life. Kevin often finds himself caught in the middle, desperately trying to protect his relationships, which are constantly sabotaged by his mother's behavior. Kevin really wants a future with family and children. But at the age of 30, his mother disapproves of his wishes. One day, his ex-girlfriend Clarita receives an unexpected call from Linda, who has found out her phone number. Linda rudely begins to interrogate Clarita about her life, using vulgar language and accusing her of only being after Kevin's money. This confrontation escalates into a series of unpleasant encounters, where Linda openly insults and threatens Clarita. Although Kevin and Clarita's relationship is short-lived, Clarita constantly feels uncomfortable and believes that Linda is stalking her. Eventually, the stress becomes too much, and she decides to break up with Kevin to find peace. Linda's plan to keep Kevin away from the girls worked for a long time, but it didn't work with Karina Taylor. Kevin and Karina's relationship grew stronger, and he wanted to build a life with her. He decided to leave his mother and move in with Karina, sharing their plans on social media. When Linda found out, she started spreading rumors and even contacted Karina at her work. Kevin wanted to make things right with Linda, and Karina believed he tried to do so the night he was shot. Kevin could not stand his mother's control, so he announced that he was leaving. However, she refused to let him go and used a weapon. She went down from the second floor and shot him in the neck. Police determined that Linda used a .357 caliber gun, the same gun used in Jim's murder. Police discovered that, once again, Linda did not immediately call the police. She waited about 15 minutes before seeking help while Kevin was on the verge of death. Phone records show that she first called her second son, Christopher, who was not nearby. The investigation concluded that Linda was guilty of attempting to murder her son. She was arrested and charged with the crime. On April 8, 2014, Linda went on trial. It had been more than 20 years since she first killed her husband. This time, the trial was held in Las Vegas, where she was charged with attempting to murder Kevin. During the trial, his younger brother Christopher, influenced by his mother, believed that his brother was responsible for the situation. He described Kevin as a very cruel person, often violent at home and often arguing with his mother. During the call, Linda informed Christopher that Kevin had attacked her by hitting her and threatening to kill her. In response, she retrieved a loaded pistol that she kept in the living room for self-defense. She intended to use it to protect herself and stop Kevin, but he took the gun from her. While he was armed, Kevin accidentally shot himself. The defense attempted to present this as an accident, but this was inconsistent with Linda's initial statement, in which she claimed that she did not see who fired the shot, and Kevin also claimed that his mother shot him. During the trial, the prosecution presented testimony from 2 girls, one former girlfriend and one current girlfriend of Kevin, as well as 4 nurses who had contact with him during his hospital stay. All of them confirmed that Linda shot him. In addition to their statements, there was considerable physical evidence, including fingerprints found on the weapon. For months after the shooting that left Kevin paralyzed, he was able to testify in court, but he altered his original story. He now claimed that there had been an argument between them that night, insisting that he attacked Linda first. The Kevin did not hold Linda responsible for the incident, referring to it as self-defense or an accident. He had expressed similar sentiments when speaking to the police at the hospital. It seemed he was worried about not surviving, so he wanted to ensure his mother wouldn't go to prison after he passed away. Kevin loved his mother deeply and continued to protect her, but this did not alter the reality that there had been reports of arguments and domestic violence coming from their home for several years. Kevin's message, originally seen as a warning to his girlfriend about Linda. It was clear that Linda had total control over her children's relationships. She chose not only who they could date but also who their friends would be. She managed Kevin's mobile phone, preventing him from talking to girls, and did the same with Christopher. The Kevin's and Christopher personal lives were completely controlled. They didn't even have doors on their rooms. Even though they were grown men, they still had to rely on their mother's permission for everything. Since childhood, Linda has said that they owe her their lives for the violent events of 20 years ago. They truly believed that their father intended to harm them, which made them completely submissive to Linda's authority. The trial was ongoing, and its outcome was uncertain. The prosecution argued that the Kevin was trying to escape his mother's oppressive control. When Linda realized she was losing control, she grabbed a gun and attempted to kill Kevin. They presented strong evidence, including a video of the Kevin in a hospital bed, where he claimed his mother shot him. However, Kevin refuted this claim, stating it stemmed from anger. While in court, Kevin appeared to take full responsibility for the incident. He admitted to threatening his mother, breaking down in tears and begging Linda for forgiveness. The prosecutor accused Linda of being completely controlling and manipulating her sons, but Kevin insisted that he was in charge and made his own decisions. He also admitted to using violence if his mother did not comply. However, this is hard to believe given the testimony of his former girlfriends, who reported that Linda did not allow her sons to pursue personal relationships and maintain tight control over their lives. Medical center staff supported the prosecution's account. They stated that Kevin was extremely agitated and appeared genuinely afraid that his mother was coming to kill him. All 4 nurses who examined him there reported that Kevin admitted that his mother had threatened and tried to kill him. Kevin was then called to testify again. The same events from Linda's first trial 20 years ago were repeated, raising suspicions that Kevin might be able to keep his mother out of jail again. However, this time, Kevin testified that the gun was pointed down when the shot was fired, contradicting his previous testimony to the prosecution. He later testified that the barrel was pointed up when he tried to take the gun away. Everyone noticed these inconsistencies in his testimony. Despite everything, Kevin still hoped that his mother would not go to jail. The prosecutor's office claimed that Kevin was biased because of his feelings for his mother, which they said affected his testimony. The jury returned a verdict in less than an hour. This time, the jury found Linda Cooney, 65, guilty of attempted murder. She was also convicted of assault with a deadly weapon, menacing, and stalking her son. At the final hearing where the verdict was announced, Bob, the brother of Jim, the first victim, spoke up. He stated that Linda had repeatedly harassed and threatened his family, ultimately taking away a loved one from them. He warned that if Linda was released from prison, those close to her would be in danger again. Kevin did not attend the sentencing but submitted a note stating that he took responsibility for these tragic events. In her defense, Linda stated that she had worked hard for years to provide for her children and meet their basic needs. However, she also believed that Kevin had inherited mental health issues from Jim, which contributed to his aggression that night. The court sentenced Linda Cooney to 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 13 years. Jim's family was unhappy with the sentence, believing it was unfair. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Graciela Garcia. Graciela Garcia was born on October 6, 1971, in Mexico. Her family was working class and they hoped to provide a better future for their children. As a result, her parents decided to move to the United States and eventually settled in Hermiston, Oregon. Graciela was too young to remember the hardships of the move. She attended Umatilla High School, a low-cost school where 66% of the student body was Hispanic. Graciela made friends easily and stood out with her outgoing. She later studied business at Blue Mountain College. However, since she was young, she has had a passion for hairdressing and has had the goal of owning her own hair salon. With passion and hard work, Graciela believed that her plans could come true with the right approach. By February 2006, she had become the owner of Carr's Beauty Salon. Thanks to her talent and charisma, she quickly became famous in society. Moreover, her professional image also contributed to the prestige of the salon. She is passionate about her work and has a deep understanding of new beauty trends. Thanks to that, she always has a loyal customer base. Some of her customers have become close friends and are often invited to her home. She is respected and loved by everyone in town. Her private life is also filled with joy and happiness. She was pursued by many men when she was young, but she only loved one. That man became her first love. They have 2 beautiful daughters, Annabelle and Gabriella, often called Gabby. However, that love did not last long. The man left the family. It seems that his feelings for her faded over time. Despite becoming a single mother, she did not feel hopeless. Instead, she focused on self-improvement and pursued a degree in cosmetology. After her divorce, Graciela met Romero Sanchez, a regular customer at the beauty salon where she worked. At first, their relationship was just a friendship. However, Romero later asked Graciela out, and she accepted. Gradually, their relationship became closer and deeper. However, when Graciela introduced Romero to her family, they felt uncomfortable because of his cold and distant attitude. Annabelle and Gabby, Graciela's two daughters, tried many times to connect with Romero, but he did not respond. Graciela's children were confused by such behavior, but they attributed it to personality differences. Graciela's partner seemed to be a strange and unapproachable person, which puzzled the people around her. They could not believe that a woman as full of life and fun as her could be so passionately in love with such a dry person. However, they still respected her decision. When Graciela announced her upcoming marriage, everyone showed their support and shared her joy. Especially Annabelle and Gabby, they wanted to see her happy and loved. On the wedding day, guests also noticed Romero's arrogance and conceit. Some thought he seemed too jealous when trying to steal all the bride's attention. When Graciela's young grandchildren came to congratulate the newlyweds, Romero treated them with contempt, making them feel uncomfortable. Afterwards, Graciela's relatives could not hide their true feelings about this man. Annabelle even openly stated that she did not consider him a stepfather and just wanted to maintain a normal relationship like other families. After the wedding, the Graciela family had two more sons, Arthur and Jacob. They moved in together at Graciela's house. Graciela's youngest son, Jacob, noticed that Romero began to act as if he were the sole owner of the house. Initially, Graciela tried to set personal boundaries, but because she did not like confrontation, she quickly gave in to Romero. He was hot-tempered and never gave in or apologized first. To avoid creating tension in the family, Graciela continued to give in to Romero. However, over time, Graciela began to realize that she had rushed into this marriage. In conversations with her relatives, Graciela confessed that she felt constrained and oppressed. Her husband controlled her and did not let her go anywhere alone. Despite this, Graciela never said she wanted to leave this abusive relationship. It seems she still loves him. Graciela's family gradually realized that she had become attached to the wrong man. Romero not only controlled Graciela but also lived off of his wife, much to her family's dismay. Romero was a skilled manipulator, constantly stalking Graciela, controlling her correspondence, and even threatening to break up the friendship between Graciela and her friends. He did not want to let her go anywhere, or sometimes he would show up unexpectedly, as if testing her loyalty. His jealousy became excessive and uncontrollable. She felt ashamed and self-conscious because of his behavior, and as a result, she limited her social life. She only communicated with her family and no longer connected with friends or colleagues as before. This seriously affected her work, as her profession required her to communicate regularly with clients and attend various events. Her friends and colleagues noticed a change in Graciela. She was no longer the cheerful and bright woman she used to be. She looked sad and tired, and she was clearly unhappy. Her children also noticed that she had changed in both her mood and appearance. They saw that she had lost her independence and confidence. After discussing it with each other, Graciela's family agreed that they did not like Romero. However, since he was Graciela's choice, there was not much they could do to change the situation. They could only respect her decision. Other relatives also expressed doubts about Romero, but no one knew how to help her in this situation. Graciela and Romero needed help with their relationship, and Gabby had mentioned this to her mother. However, Graciela believed that she would manage her personal life on her own. In 2018, Graciela decided to move her salon to her home for convenience. However, her family was skeptical as they had not heard about the plan for 12 years. Some customers commented that Romero's constant presence at the salon made them feel uncomfortable. Some people thought that Graciela moved the salon home to solve the problem, but others doubted that the idea came from Romero. However, Graciela was happy about the change and believed that working from home would bring her closer to Jacob and Romero. At the end of the year, she and her husband renovated a room into a beauty salon, completing it in May 2019. The salon closed shortly after, but Graciela's reputation remained intact, and rumors of her reopening attracted many customers, including new ones. Graciela was delighted with her career success, but became increasingly secretive about her personal life. However, after 17 years of marriage, Graciela and Romero decided to separate. Romero always kept in touch with their children and saw them regularly. Graciela and her ex-husband shared custody of their youngest son, while the other children were grown and living on their own, but they still kept in regular contact with their family and participated in family activities. Graciela went through the divorce with a calm and optimistic attitude. After the divorce, Graciela focused on developing her beauty salon and spent her free time taking care of her family and close friends. On the morning of November 9, 2019, Romero visited Graciela's eldest daughter, Annabelle, and reported Graciela missing. According to Romero, Graciela and he had been together the night before. However, when he woke up the next morning, he was surprised to find that she was no longer there. Romero tried to contact Graciela but received no response. Annabelle was shocked by the news and Romero's reaction. He cried and appeared distressed. This made Annabelle feel strange because Romero usually did not show emotions in front of them. Romero also said that Graciela had been acting strangely recently, even hinting that she might have found another man in her life. Annabelle felt that Romero's words were insincere and his tears seemed fake, which made her start to doubt his behavior and worry about her mother. Romero usually avoided communicating with his wife's children. But after a while, he changed and decided to connect with them. After Romero left, Annabelle decided to inform the rest of the family about what had happened. Graciela's family gathers to find out what's happening to her. Graciela's car was parked in the driveway. If she decided to leave Romero, she would definitely use her own car. Another thing that surprised them was the neatness of Graciela's house. Everything was perfectly arranged and in order, far beyond normal. However, this was completely contrary to Graciela's personality and lifestyle, because if she went somewhere, her belongings and accessories would be scattered all over the room. Normally, Graciela would spend a lot of time in front of the mirror choosing her outfit for the day. However, the fact that she went out without any jewelry worried the whole family and they wondered why. As she walked around the house, Gabby noticed something strange. The large blanket had been put in the washing machine, something her mother never did. The blanket was too heavy and someone else had washed it, apparently Romero, which made Gabby suspicious. Romero did not explain this, saying that he did not pay attention to such details. But then people realized that several important items were missing from the house, including Graciela's passport, driver's license, and cell phone. This raised further suspicions about Romero's actions. On November 11th, Annabelle contacted law enforcement at the police station and discovered something surprising. Although Romero had known about his wife's disappearance since the 9th or possibly earlier, he had not notified the police. Therefore, Annabelle was the first to file a missing persons report to her mother. Another incident raised concerns about Graciela's safety. She asked Gabby to pick her up, but even though Gabby said it would take some time because of the distance, Graciela continued to ask. Gabby was surprised by this unexpected request for help. Graciela explained that everything was fine and that her request was just a result of an argument with Romero. When they met, Graciela appeared relaxed, smiling and asking her daughter not to worry. She believed that arguments between lovers were just a form of renewal in their relationship. However, after they broke up, Gabby remained uneasy and became increasingly worried about her mother. The investigation began after Annabelle contacted the police. This caused the relationship between Graciela's family and Romero to deteriorate. Romero seemed angry that Graciela's family had notified law enforcement about her disappearance. Romero gave an official statement about his wife's disappearance. He said that Graciela either wanted to be alone or that she had moved in with another man and would be back soon. That was his answer every time someone asked. However, the police did not ignore this report. Officers launched an investigation into the missing Graciela's disappearance, considering the possibility that she may have been a victim of a crime. They started by searching her house, where her relatives reported that only a few personal items were missing. Without finding any other suspicious signs, the investigation expanded to include interviews with her children, Romero, and other close family members, including her ex-husband. However, no useful information was gathered from these interviews. While everyone expressed doubts about Romero's behavior, he cooperated fully with the detectives, allowing them to search his home, answering questions, providing his DNA, and taking a polygraph test. Despite this cooperation, there was insufficient evidence to prove his involvement in the case. Further investigation revealed that Graciela's phone last sent a signal near a bridge in Washington on November 9 at 12:30 p.m. After that, her phone was turned off. Her bank accounts and social media accounts showed no activity, suggesting that she had not accessed since her disappearance. Hundreds of witnesses were questioned, and all the places she regularly visited were checked, but no one had any information about her whereabouts. The investigators found her disappearance to be highly suspicious, as it seemed she had vanished without leaving any clues. For months into the investigation, the Hermiston Police Department announced that they had found no reliable information about Graciela's last whereabouts. Although Romero had not reported her missing, he was not accused of any wrongdoing. Graciela's family became increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress despite their constant contact with authorities throughout the incident. However, as time passed, these updates became less frequent and eventually stopped, forcing Graciela's children to take initiative and contact the police station themselves to inquire about the status of the case. In an effort to reinvigorate the search, Graciela's family turned to the media in March 2020, seeking public assistance and attention. They hoped that by sharing their story, they might gather new information. Graciela's daughter Gabby was mainly in charge of communicating with the press. She expressed her family's increasing frustration with the lack of progress in the case and criticized the police for not keeping them informed for such a long time. She urged investigators to focus more on finding her mother, Graciela, and to take a closer look at the suspicious circumstances surrounding disappearance. Graciela's family suspected something was wrong, as the condition of her belongings was strange and unusual in her home. However, it was unclear who would want to harm her, as Graciela did not appear to have any enemies. The family also believed that Graciela would not have left on her own, as she would have contacted them to reassure. Posters and flyers describing Graciela were scattered throughout the city in search of clues to the case. Graciela, who is 49 years old, Latina, 1.6 meters tall, 62 kilograms, and with dyed blonde hair. Local residents were also asked to be vigilant and report any information that might help the investigation. Her children were so concerned that they asked for a new detective team to take over the case, as they suspected bias in collaboration with a suspect, Romero, who was acquainted with the original investigators. The Graciela family expressed concerns about several inconsistencies in the investigation, including the fact that Romero's phone was turned off on the day of Graciela's disappearance. Additionally, Romero's calm behavior raised suspicions, as it didn't with the typical reaction expected from someone whose loved one has suddenly gone missing. As a result, the Graciela family demanded that the suspect be arrested immediately. Police Chief Jason Edmiston responded to allegations surrounding Graciela's disappearance, confirming that her case is being treated as suspicious and possibly involving foul play. However, he emphasized that this is just one theory and that the investigation remains impartial, driven by evidence. Edmiston also dismissed claims of social connections between Romero and law enforcement as baseless. Edmiston noted that the spread of misinformation has hindered the investigation. Certain information must be kept confidential, and authorities have sought assistance from the FBI. The police chief expressed frustration over public criticism of the police's actions. Separately, Gabby organized a fundraiser to hire a private detective, a move seen as a critique of the police's handling of the investigation. This perceived criticism suggested that the police were not doing enough to find Graciela. 1 year after Graciela disappeared, her family organized a memorial gathering. Here, friends and people who knew her shared stories about her lively and cheerful personality. They prayed for her safe return, lit candles, and later placed signs outside the police station, urging authorities to continue the search for Graciela Garcia. In September 2023, a major development in the case occurred when Romero Sanchez was severely injured in an attack and that required surgery. There was speculation that the shooter was Mason Garcia, Graciela's brother. The attack suggests that Graciela's family had become frustrated with the lack of progress in the investigation and took matters into their own hands, potentially leading to further tragedy. The disappearance of Graciela Garcia remains an unsolved mystery, leaving her family in a state of agonizing. This has significantly affected the health and mental well-being of her family. Living without knowing what happened to a loved one can be more challenging than coping with a confirmed loss. It remains unknown whether Graciela is alive or not. Her children continue to hope that the truth will soon be revealed and justice will be served to the criminals. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kimberly Antonakis. Kimberly Antonakis was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in her family. Although she grew up in love and wealth, her father, Thomas, founded his own computer company. When Kimberly was young, her parents divorced. Kimberly left to live with her mother, and she still kept in touch with her father. Her father Thomas spent weekends taking Kimberly out and spending all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, she was faced with a difficult choice: to stay with her mother or her father. Since she did not want to leave her familiar environment, Kimberly decided to live with her father Thomas. Kim began living with Thomas. Kimberly grew up to be a well-behaved and sociable child. Over the years, Kimberly became a beautiful and humorous girl. In 1994, Kimberly began attending the College of Staten Island. At that time, she informed her father that she felt she was old enough to live on her own. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was worried about this decision but still praised her and decided not to object. Instead, Thomas promised to ensure that Kimberly had a safe place of her own. Her father Thomas bought an apartment for Kimberly in a wealthy area of the city. He also installed an alarm system for the apartment to ensure Kimberly's safety. To avoid having to park far from home, Thomas bought a parking space in the garage across the street. He also bought Kimberly a cell phone and a pager so they could stay in touch regularly. Kimberly works as an accountant at a company. She lives a normal life like other students, often participating in entertainment activities and parties. Although her father Thomas repeatedly asked her to return to live with him, Kimberly insisted on being independent. In early 1995, Kimberly's best friend Liz Pace's house was being renovated. Liz, along with her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their young son, came to Kimberly's house to ask for temporary accommodation. Out of kindness, Kimberly agreed to let Liz Pace's family stay. One day, Kimberly and Liz decided to go to a party. They got their makeup done, their hair done, and their outfits picked out. Afterwards, they had a great time and danced at the party. When the party was over, Kimberly drove Liz home in her 1994 white Honda Accord. However, Kimberly did not go up to the apartment with Liz because she had unfinished business. The two girls hugged and said goodbye. Liz returned to the apartment first. The next morning, when Kimberly did not show up for work, her co-workers contacted her father, Thomas, to inform him that Kimberly had not shown up for work. Kimberly's absence was unusual because she was always on time. Thomas was also unable to reach his daughter on her cell phone, which made him feel worried and had a bad feeling. Thomas decided to contact Kimberly's friends. However, no one had any information about where she had gone after leaving the party early in the morning of March 1st. When Thomas did not hear from her friends, Thomas decided to go to the police to report the incident. The police thought that Kimberly might have stayed at a friend's house overnight and would return soon, so they advised him to wait at least 24 hours. However, Thomas was not satisfied. He decided to conduct an investigation himself to find Kimberly. After learning of Kimberly's disappearance, Kimberly's mother met with a psychic after being introduced by a friend. Upon seeing Kimberly's photo, the psychic said that she was alive, but very weak and dehydrated. She also said that Kimberly had been kidnapped by acquaintances and that Kimberly had tried to escape several times. She added that the danger came from several people and that one of them had a name that started with the letter J, and that this person was apparently the leader of the gang. Thomas, Kimberly's father, went to the places his daughter frequented and talked to many people, but did not get any important information. Thomas went to Kimberly's apartment and garage to check. When entering Kimberly's apartment, Thomas noticed a bright object lying on the floor near the wall. It turned out to be a small gold earring. Thomas remembered that he had given Kimberly this pair of earrings. Thomas put the earring in his pocket. After checking, Kimberly was not in the apartment either. Thomas only met Kimberly's best friend Liz and her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their 2-year-old child. Thomas knew about Kimberly letting Liz's family stay temporarily. But Thomas did not support this decision. When Thomas talked about Kimberly's situation, Liz's family was surprised and worried about Kimberly's disappearance. Joshua reported that he was looking for Kimberly and volunteered to help. Thomas then went to the police station a second time and insisted that they conduct a search. The police agreed to help him and began an investigation. The police began to investigate the date of Kimberly's disappearance on February 28th. It was found that Kimberly went to college in the morning, then went to work. After work, Kimberly went home and had dinner. She then attended a party with Liz and returned home around 4 a.m. Kimberly then went to the parking lot, but the reason she was there at such an early hour is still unclear. Kimberly's bank account was also investigated. The police discovered that Kimberly had last used her bank card the evening before she went missing. The police assumed that Kimberly had been kidnapped. Due to the lack of concrete evidence, the police looked into the information that Kimberly's mother had received from the psychic. Witness interviews were then conducted. The first people interviewed were Liz and Joshua. The police discovered that a total of 65 calls had been made from Kimberly's phone on the morning of March 1st. This surprised the police because of the large number of calls. However, Joshua explained that he had called all of his friends and acquaintances to find out where Kimberly had gone and why she had not stayed home overnight. Joshua said that he considered Kimberly to be like a sister to him. Thanks to Liz's testimony, the police were able to identify the clothes that Kimberly was wearing. A portrait of her has been drawn and will be released to help in the search. In addition, the police have also noticed some distinctive tattoos on Kimberly's body. One of them is a scorpion, which corresponds to her zodiac sign. The other tattoo is located on her waist and represents the infinity sign in the form of two naked people parallel to each other. A search for the missing car has been launched. The police have checked all scrap yards and other places where the car could be dismantled for parts or sold. However, this search has not yielded any positive results. The police have advised Thomas to pay attention to letters and phone calls he receives, as it is possible that his daughter's kidnappers will contact Thomas and offer a ransom. At around 2 a.m. on March 4th, the emergency services received a report of a fire. A large abandoned house was on fire at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Fire crews were called in to put out the fire. When the fire was finally extinguished, firefighters found a charred body in the basement of the building. Forensic experts revealed that the deceased was a young woman between the ages of 20 and 25. Some of her long black hair was still on her head. There were also traces of tape. The woman's legs were tied tightly, and her hands were tied behind her back. However, the worst part was that she was still alive when the fire broke out, as evidenced by her lungs filled with smoke. In fact, the young woman had been brutally burned alive. Police suspect that the body may be that of Kimberly, who had gone missing. However, dental records need to be examined to confirm the identity. At the same time, experts have also analyzed the ashes to determine the victim's identity. When the autopsy was done, experts found no other traces besides the body. However, they found tattoos that matched the description of the missing woman. Records from the dental clinic also confirmed that this was how Kimberly Antonakis' body was found. A witness to the fire reported that he often walked his dog. However, the pet had been behaving strangely every time it passed the house. After the fire and the discovery of the body, it was discovered what had attracted the dog's attention. Kimberly tried to free herself and call for help. The dog had heard sounds coming from the basement thanks to its sensitive hearing, while humans cannot perceive it. When the police questioned the homeowner, it turned out that he had put the house up for sale and had been monitoring its condition through letters and receipts. However, this man had not checked the basement, only the house from the outside. The police decided to question Joshua again because they still had many unanswered questions about him. Notably, they also noticed an interesting coincidence that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua revealed to them about a friend who had not been contacted on the day Kimberly went missing. It was a young Russian man nicknamed Psycho who had a romantic relationship with Kimberly. The police decided to verify the information about this person and learned that Psycho was a Russian citizen who moved to the United States as a child, and that he later joined a gang and repeatedly broke the law. Thus, a suspicious suspect appeared and was soon arrested. During the interrogation, Psycho said that he knew about Kimberly's death. His reaction shocked the police because Psycho insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime, but also showed deep sorrow. It seems he is experiencing real emotions. After investigation, Psycho's alibi was confirmed. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. Kimberly's family decided to seek help from a psychic once again. This time, the psychic said she saw 4 people involved in the case. She also said that the kidnappers wanted to contact the family but were unable to do so. The abduction initially showed no signs of a tragic ending. Thomas then announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest of the perpetrators. Thomas could not forget the psychic's words. He began to think about what she had said about the kidnappers wanting to contact the family. He wondered what that meant and what was stopping them from doing so. When he returned home, Thomas remembered a small detail from the day Kimberly went missing. Thomas had listened to all the answering machine recordings because he hoped Kimberly would contact him. However, there was no voicemail except for 2 blank messages. When he turned them on, he heard nothing, just silence on the other end of the phone. Thomas mistook them for a technical malfunction or a communication problem. 5 days after Kimberly's body was discovered, the police found her car. It was parked in a quiet part of town, near the crime scene. The police hoped to find fingerprints in the car, but unfortunately the car had been washed. The only traces left in the car were a few strands of Kimberly's hair and an earring. During this time, Thomas was implicated in a local mafia hit. Some members of Thomas's crew even blamed him for their daughter's death, as if Thomas's dark actions had caused Kimberly's troubles. However, Thomas denied any involvement. The police investigated this information through their own channels but found no evidence to confirm it. Thomas did not appear to have had anything to do with the incident and continued his business openly. In July 1995, a young man was arrested by police at a New York City home for burglary. However, during questioning, he provided information related to Kimberly's case. The detainee claimed that he had heard from an acquaintance that his friends had kidnapped and then burned the girl alive. When the police learned that the man was Joshua Torres, who lived in Kimberly's apartment and had been involved in the search for her, they decided to take a closer look at Joshua Torres. Joshua was asked to come in for questioning and he denied any involvement in the incident. However, during a lengthy conversation, he made a confession. Joshua said that if he had really been the kidnapper, he would have fed Kimberly. This intrigued the police because there was no information given that Kimberly had died of hunger, thirst, or cold. Only the police knew this information. The police needed more evidence to clear up the case. After investigating, they discovered that Joshua Torres had a criminal record. Furthermore, he had no job and was living off Liz. Meanwhile, Liz worked to support both of them. Joshua took care of the child and had free time to secretly plan the crime. Joshua followed Kimberly and learned her habits, and kidnapped Kimberly and hid her in an abandoned house. But surprisingly, Joshua did not ask for ransom. During the investigation, the calls Joshua made that morning were analyzed. The results showed that Joshua had lied when he said he called Kimberly's friends and acquaintances. But when checked, most of the phone numbers were from random people who had nothing to do with Kimberly. When checking Joshua's pager data, the police discovered that Joshua had sent several strange messages on March 1st. These evidences gradually closed the circle around Joshua Torres. Finally, the police had a solid lead to arrest Joshua. When the police told Joshua that they no longer considered Kimberly's ex-boyfriend a suspect, Joshua changed his story. Joshua said that he suspected his friends of murdering Kimberly. Joshua confessed to assisting in the kidnapping. Joshua said he did not think Joshua's accomplices would decide to kill Kimberly. According to Joshua, they only wanted to demand ransom and release Kimberly, but the plan failed. When the kidnappers could not contact Thomas, even recorded a ransom message. However, for some reason, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers were angry that Thomas did not respond. The kidnappers were scared because the psychic said that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was released to the media and broadcast on TV. After speaking with the police, Joshua was released on bail and then disappeared. At the same time, Joshua's accuser, Jose, was shot in the back of the head while he was with his wife. Jose's wife later admitted to the police that her husband did not trust Joshua, used a tape recorder when talking to Joshua, and wanted to expose him. Police were able to establish details of the kidnapping and the crime through pager messages and statements from the suspects. The case involved 4 suspects: Joshua Torres, Julio Negrin, another man named Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett. It is worth noting that Julio had dated Kimberly and even intended to marry her. However, Kimberly rejected his proposal. Nicholas had just been released from prison before the kidnapping took place thanks to a bond from his mother. Nicholas had planned the incident while serving a prison sentence for serious crimes. Joshua had a criminal record dating back to his youth, including kidnapping and the legal use of weapons. A kidnapping had taken place, in which Joshua was the mastermind. Joshua directed the actions of the kidnapping group. When Kimberly returned from a party, the group of men attacked her in the parking lot. They had apparently been watching and waiting for Kimberly to be alone. To control Kimberly, they used guns to threaten Kimberly and force her to be quiet. They then tied Kimberly's hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. The group then put Kimberly in the trunk of their car and drove her to an abandoned house. There, they took Kimberly into the basement and tied her to a chair. They also took off Kimberly's shoes to prevent her from making noise by tapping her feet. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed money and that they would release her when the money was paid. One of the kidnappers, Julio, was assigned to take care of her, bringing her food and water twice a day and keeping her warm. However, Julio left the house because he was afraid of the consequences. So, for 3 days, Kimberly had no food, no water, and was freezing. Immediately after kidnapping Kimberly, the kidnappers notified Joshua, who then demanded a ransom of $775,000 via an audio message. Joshua then called Thomas and left 2 empty audio messages. Therefore, Thomas ignored these calls. The kidnappers were waiting for a message from Thomas, but they did not understand why Thomas did not contact them. During this time, Kimberly was left alone and fainted several times due to dehydration, but Kimberly still managed to survive. The kidnappers did not receive the ransom and were afraid of being caught, so they decided to release Kimberly. When they went down to the basement, they found Kimberly unconscious. They thought Kimberly was dead and decided to get rid of all the evidence, including the hostage. The police knew that Joshua had directed the actions of his accomplices from inside the house, so Liz did not know that Joshua had kidnapped Kimberly. At the trial, Liz said that after being questioned, Joshua came to her and confessed everything. Joshua then beat her and threatened to kill her before fleeing. Sometime after the massacre, the police investigated Jose. He was also suspected of being involved in Kimberly's murder, but there was no direct evidence. Therefore, the police decided to take statements from the kidnappers. When questioning Joshua, he denied all involvement in the case. However, Julio decided to cooperate and gave an honest statement about the incident. Information from Julio allowed Joshua's role in the case to be determined, and Joshua was charged with Kimberly's murder. Therefore, Joshua, Julio and Nicholas were charged with related crimes such as murder, kidnapping and vandalism. At the trial, after more than 10 hours of debate, Joshua was finally sentenced to life in prison for 58 years, the same sentence that Nicholas Brett also received. Julio Negrin was convicted of complicity and sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison after the incident. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was pleased with the court's decision. Because Thomas did not want criminals to be sentenced to death. In his eyes, the death penalty was not the most severe punishment. Nicholas experienced abuse and assault in prison many times, and after only 2 years of incarceration, Nicholas died of AIDS. Meanwhile, Julio was released after 2 years after completing his sentence. However, Joshua is still serving a longer sentence and cannot be released until 2053 at the earliest, if he is still alive at that time. In 2005, Thomas died of cancer. His family believes that Kimberly's death caused Thomas a lot of stress, and that cancer was part of that. The life of Kimberly Antonakos, a beautiful girl, ended suddenly and tragically. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Wright was born on April 24, 1976 in Houston, Texas. Her parents, Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright, lived a simple life and raised Susan and her older sister, Cindy. From a young age, Susan was an active, friendly, and talented child. During her school years, she participated in dancing activities and aspired to become a professional choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, Susan had many fans. However, after graduating from high school, Susan's dream of becoming a student did not come true. But she did not give up, and after a short break, she saved money to continue her studies. For a long time, Susan worked as a dancer at a famous nightclub in the city. However, she soon realized that this job was not for her and decided to leave. She then used her savings to study nursing at night at a university. With the goal of becoming independent, Susan balanced her studies with a job as a waitress at a restaurant to support herself. However, after a while, Susan realized that a career in medicine was not the right path for her and paying for her tuition became difficult. Therefore, Susan decided to drop out of school and focus on her work. In 1997, Susan met Jeffrey Wright at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. She was 21 years old at the time and Jeffrey went to the restaurant for a meal. From then on, their romantic relationship began. Jeffrey was immediately attracted to the blue-eyed blonde's beauty and bright smile. He left a generous tip and became a regular customer. Finally, he mustered up the courage to ask for Susan's phone number. Susan recalls that Jeffrey began calling her every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Jeffrey arranged romantic dates and small surprises like sending flowers and touching notes to Susan's workplace. In the evenings, Jeffrey would meet her and take her home. Although Jeffrey was 8 years older than her, the age gap did not bother them. Jeffrey was attentive, sweet, and caring, and quickly won Susan's heart. However, Jeffrey had some problems with alcohol and substance abuse. Jeffrey said that he had given up drugs and promised to give up drinking completely. Susan, a naive young girl, believed him. Susan felt that together they could overcome any challenge. Shortly after Susan learned she was pregnant, she immediately shared the news with Jeffrey. Although Jeffrey initially expressed joy at the prospect of becoming a father, he had not made any decisions about the future. Jeffrey did not propose and they continued to live apart. Disturbed by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan insisted that their first child be born, and Jeffrey accepted her opinion. At the time of the marriage license, Susan was 8 months pregnant. Their wedding was a simple affair, with no guests or witnesses. A few weeks before the baby was due, they moved into a quiet house in Harris County, Texas. In December 1998, Susan gave birth to a son named Bradley. Just 3 years later, she was pregnant again. In the spring of 2002, she welcomed her second daughter, named Kay. Along the shore, the family also raised a small dog named Buck and had a spacious family car. Jeffrey worked for a local construction company, and after they had a daughter named Kay, Jeffrey agreed that Susan would stay home to care for the child. Friendly neighbors often praised Susan as a kind and caring mother. She created a cozy environment for the family. From the outside, it seemed like the perfect family. Every day, Susan has to spend a lot of time doing housework such as cleaning, organizing, cooking, and making sure everything is kept in a clean condition. Jeffrey does not want her to repeat the same recipes. The whole house has to be clean for Susan. Taking care of young children and cleaning the house at the same time can be considered impossible. Jeffrey's clothes have to be washed almost every day because he doesn't want to wear any of the same clothes again. However, following these rules manually is not easy. If Susan doesn't comply with his request, she will face insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Financially, Jeffrey is extremely frugal. Contrary to the image of a romantic man who often gives gifts and flowers, Jeffrey only gives Susan $100 a week to cover household expenses. At the same time, he also asked her to settle all expenses and provide receipts. Jeffrey also broke his earlier promise to quit drinking. However, the real problems were just beginning. Jeffrey relapsed and started using drugs again. Under the influence of these substances, Jeffrey would become aggressive and would hurt his wife and son. Whenever Susan asked Jeffrey to stop using drugs and go to rehab, Jeffrey responded with anger. Jeffrey saw no problem with his actions and believed that Susan knew about Jeffrey's drug and alcohol use before Susan married him, so she should accept it and live with it. Jeffrey's parents also knew their son's weakness and sympathized with Susan. However, they felt helpless and unable to help her. What Susan couldn't stand, however, was when her husband began to physically, emotionally, and even sexually abuse her. At first, he would apologize and promise not to do it again, but then he stopped apologizing and domestic violence became a daily occurrence. Jeffrey began boxing at the gym 3 times a week, finding that the sessions helped him relieve stress. On Monday, January 13, 2003, Jeffrey went to the gym after work as usual. When he returned home, he seemed stressed. While Susan was cooking dinner, Jeffrey decided to tell his son about the sport of boxing and teach him some basic techniques. While teaching his son boxing, Jeffrey lost control and hit the boy. The child burst into tears, and Jeffrey tried to comfort the child, hoping his wife wouldn't hear. Susan pretended not to notice, but this incident was the last straw for Susan. After dinner, Susan went to put the children to bed while Jeffrey remained in the bedroom. When Susan entered the room, Jeffrey attacked her violently. Susan thought that Jeffrey was trying to kill her with a knife. However, she reacted and realized that Jeffrey did not have a knife in his hand. Susan decided to use her dancing skills to seduce Jeffrey and lower his guard. Susan entered the room in a short silk robe and performed the dance for her husband. Susan then proposed a game, which Jeffrey agreed to participate in. In this game, Susan used 3 reins to tie Jeffrey's right hand and right leg to the bed. Jeffrey's left leg was secured with a silk strip from her robe. While Jeffrey was tied up, Susan used her panties to spank him, forming part of the intimate game. Susan gently turned off the lights. Jeffrey was now bound hand and foot, and a gag was stuffed into his mouth. The dim candles were the only remaining light. Susan then moved the bubbling hot wax onto Jeffrey's chest. Susan then continued pouring the hot wax onto his genitals, and the pain quickly became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself, tried to scream, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Susan continued to beat Jeffrey with a small, sharp knife she had taken from the kitchen. Susan started at the groin area, moving up and down, cutting Jeffrey's genitals, legs, stomach, chest, arms, neck, and face. At first, Susan moved slowly, complaining loudly with each slash, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had endured. Then Susan began to cry and stabbed faster and faster. Her actions showed that Susan was in a state of extreme despair and emotional turmoil. Susan could not stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. Susan sat by the bed next to Jeffrey's body. However, after a few hours, Susan realized that the bedroom was covered in blood and she had to clean it up before morning. Susan carefully watched the window, making sure no neighbors were watching. At this point, Susan saw a hole in the backyard, which Jeffrey had dug over the weekend to build a fountain. Susan quickly moved Jeffrey's body from the bedroom to the yard, using a garden wheelbarrow to move it. Susan decided that the pool would be Jeffrey's final resting place. After calming down, Susan spent the rest of the day, before dawn, cleaning up the evidence of the attack. Susan had to wash the blood off the floors, walls, and carpets. The carpets had large stains that could not be removed. Susan added bleach to the stains, hoping that the chemicals would erase any traces of what had happened in the room. That morning, Susan called her husband's family in Austin, Texas, sobbing. Susan told them that her husband Jeffrey, while drinking and using drugs, had attacked Susan and their young son. Jeffrey then destroyed the house, spilling a bottle of bleach on the carpet before leaving, declaring that Jeffrey did not want to continue the marriage. When Jeffrey's parents heard that Jeffrey had been beating their son, they were shocked. They knew Jeffrey wasn't perfect, and they felt sorry for Susan. They offered to let Susan and the children stay at their house for a while, but Susan refused. Instead, Susan said she would file a police report and tell them everything that had happened in the family. Then, when Jeffrey suddenly went missing, Jeffrey's mother, Mrs. Wright, went to the police station to report the incident. Susan said Jeffrey had been violent towards Susan and the children. As a result, Susan had to file for a restraining order, which meant that Jeffrey would not be allowed near Susan and the children. When Susan filed for the restraining order, Susan presented evidence of her injuries, such as bruises and cuts on her arms. Susan said the injuries were caused by Jeffrey during a fight when he hit her with a key. Susan's children were also victims, especially Bradley, who was hit by his father and had minor bruises on his face. At first glance, the story told by Susan seemed plausible. Jeffrey, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, attacked Susan and her young son, after which Jeffrey became frightened and ran away. But over time, Jeffrey stopped communicating. And Jeffrey fled without taking his belongings, papers, and even his cell phone from home. Jeffrey did not go to work or to his parents' house, and none of his friends or neighbors saw Jeffrey. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Susan's situation is not optimistic, as she finds it unbearable to be in the house where Susan murdered Jeffrey and buried his body in the yard. Susan begins to feel as if Jeffrey is still alive and about to rise from the grave to take revenge. Susan is on the verge of going crazy, and their dog Buck keeps barking and trying to dig up the burial site. On January 17th, after dropping her children off at school, Susan went to her mother Velma's house. Her mother learned about the incident and asked Susan, "You killed your husband, didn't you?" Susan burst into tears and nodded. Susan confessed what had happened and revealed where Susan had hidden Jeffrey's body, saying she didn't know what to do next. On her mother's advice, Susan contacted attorney Neil Davis the next day and confessed that Susan had killed her husband. Attorney Davis worked out a solution and thought carefully about possible scenarios. On January 19th, Neil Davis called the Harris County District Attorney's office and reported that Susan Wright had killed her husband Jeffrey and buried his body in the backyard. Susan Wright was ready to give a statement to the police. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police and stated that she would give a full confession. On January 24, 2003, Susan went to the police and confessed the whole thing. However, when she was interviewed, Susan's story was unclear and full of contradictions. Susan was confused about the details and sometimes contradicted herself. Susan also claimed that Jeffrey was still alive and that she was afraid of him. As a result, Susan requested protection. As a result, Susan underwent a psychological evaluation and was diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression. However, Susan was still able to understand her actions. Following Susan's statement, the police arrived at the scene and removed Jeffrey's body from the makeshift grave in the backyard. The medical examiner was surprised to see numerous injuries on the body. The medical examiner's team counted a total of 193 stab wounds on the body. Specifically, there were 8 wounds in the groin area, about 30 wounds in the legs, 23 wounds in the shoulders and arms, 22 wounds in the abdomen, 46 wounds in the arms, 23 wounds in the neck, and 41 wounds in the face. However, only 1 wound to the head could be considered the direct cause of death. All other cuts were superficial and did not pose an immediate threat to life. This left Jeffrey with a long and painful death. Police saw deep marks on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles from the ropes and belt Susan used to restrain him. These injuries indicated that Jeffrey had tried to free himself but was unsuccessful. Additionally, traces of candle wax were found on Jeffrey's gun and groin area. Susan claimed that it was an accident as her husband accidentally turned a burning candle on himself, but police believe the hot wax was more likely a form of torture inflicted on Jeffrey to cause pain. Susan's underwear was still in Jeffrey's mouth, acting as a gag to prevent Jeffrey from screaming or calling for help. Toxicology reports revealed traces of alcohol and several controlled substances in Jeffrey's system, suggesting that Jeffrey may have acted aggressively under the influence of these substances. The bedroom where the massacre took place appeared normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet, suggesting that Susan had spent a lot of time cleaning and hiding the evidence. When experts used chemicals and special equipment to detect the blood traces that had been cleaned up, a completely different view of the project emerged. Blood was found everywhere, including on the ceiling and the red blood cell cushion. The trial began in late February 2004. By that time, Susan had been in custody for a year and her children were in the care of her parents and sister Cindy. Susan's attorney had prepared extensively for the trial and worked extensively with Susan. When questioned, Susan recounted the sad story of that terrible night and the events leading up to it. Susan said she had endured years of abuse and resistance. However, when Jeffrey began abusing the children, Susan could not take it anymore. Susan recounted that fateful evening, Jeffrey came home from the gym in a state of agitation. Jeffrey then began teaching their 5-year-old son punching and fighting techniques. When the son became scared and refused, Jeffrey punched him in the face. Susan then put the child to bed and decided to talk to Jeffrey about seeking help at a clinic for alcohol and drug abuse. However, Jeffrey became angry and decided to leave, taking the keys with him. While Susan tried to stop Jeffrey, a fight broke out between the two, leaving Susan with injuries to her palm and wrist. During the attack, Jeffrey attacked her, causing her to fall to the floor and briefly lose consciousness. When Susan regained consciousness, she found Jeffrey holding a knife in his hand. Susan could not explain how the knife ended up in her hand afterward. Susan's attorney argued that Susan's mental instability was the cause of her actions, causing Susan to lose control of her attacks until she had inflicted multiple injuries on Jeffrey. Susan said she tied the rope and belt around Jeffrey's hands after inflicting multiple injuries, then used a wheelbarrow to carry Jeffrey out into the yard. As for the scraps found, Susan claimed they came from a candle that Susan had left on her bedside table that night when she had left the nightlight on. Susan could not explain why her underwear appeared in Jeffrey's mouth. The prosecution's argument and conclusion were more convincing and reasonable. Experts demonstrated that the deep wounds and abrasions on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles were inflicted while he was still alive, indicating that the binding was part of an intimate game that Susan used to lure Jeffrey into a trap. Therefore, it was reasonable that Susan's underwear had replaced the gag in Jeffrey's mouth. Furthermore, all of the wounds were inflicted at a certain angle, as if Susan were on top of Jeffrey's body, sitting on him, rather than in the midst of a struggle, which would have resulted in a different type of injury. All of the cuts were made from the front while Jeffrey was lying on his back and firmly immobilized. The question remains whether Susan planned Jeffrey's death. The prosecution claims that Susan planned the whole thing in hopes of receiving a large insurance payout. The case was widely publicized as Susan was dubbed the Blue-Eyed Butcher or the Blonde Meat Grinder by the press. Jeffrey's relatives demanded the harshest punishment for Susan. At first, people asked for a life sentence for Susan. However, in March 2004, Susan was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Susan did not think about the judge's decision and was completely emotionless. A year later, Susan's attorneys attempted to appeal the conviction, but it was denied. With new developments and a reduced sentence in 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal. This time, a new witness testimony significantly affected the outcome of the case. Misty McKell, wife of former NFL champion Steve McKell, had a close relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was even engaged to Jeffrey for a year. However, Misty McKell shared horrific experiences of being physically and mentally abused by Jeffrey, causing her to abandon plans for marriage and end the relationship permanently. After considering Misty McKell's testimony, Susan's sentence was reduced to 20 years. In 2014, when she was 38 years old, Susan was eligible for parole once but was denied. Susan was also denied a second time in July 2017. Finally, after 16 years in prison, Susan was released in the winter of 2020 when she was 44 years old. Susan Wright's case was widely covered in the media and aired on the U.S. national television network Court TV. The story was later made into several popular television documentaries, including 48 Hours Mystery and The Secret Lives of Stepford Wives. In 2012, the feature film Blue-Eyed Butcher was released, starring actress Sarah Paxton as Susan Wright. Additionally, in 2014, Canadian documentary filmmaker Chloe Ballant discovered a short film inspired by Susan Wright's trial. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Petit family. The Petit family was viewed as a model family due to their stable economic background and well-behaved children, earning them genuine admiration from those around them. William Petit, the father, was a standout athlete in high school, particularly in basketball, where he demonstrated natural leadership skills. He was also the top student in his class, going on to earn a law degree from Dartmouth University. However, William's true passion lay in helping others, caring for the sick, and making a positive impact on the social. After completing his law degree, he decided to pursue a career in medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. It was during his third year of residency at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh that William met Jennifer Hawk, a nurse specializing in oncology and co-director of the Health Center for a pre-graduate internship program. They fell deeply in love, with those who knew them confirming that they were perfectly suited for each other. The couple got married in 1985. 4 years later, they had their first daughter, Haley. Her birth inspired them to have a large family, which prompted them to purchase a house in Cheshire, Connecticut. On November 17, 1995, their second daughter, Michaela, was born. Following childbirth, Jennifer resumed her work as a nurse and internship co-director. However, she was later diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic disease with no cure that would follow her for the rest of her life. Her family remained supportive throughout. At 10 years old, Haley started raising money for the Multiple Sclerosis Society, generating significant funds over time. Michaela also performed well academically. And when Haley went to college, Michaela planned to take over the fundraising efforts so she could continue supporting their community. The summer before, Michaela had learned to cook and she enjoyed preparing meals for her family. Tragically, this daily activity leads the family to an encounter with a criminal. One July evening in 2007, Michaela was preparing dinner, but she needed additional ingredients. She and her mother went to the nearest market, where they coincidentally encountered Joshua Komisarjevsky, a man recently released from prison. Joshua had experienced a traumatic and complicated childhood. He was born to teenage parents. He was put up for adoption a week after birth and adopted by the Komisarjevsky family, renowned artists in Europe known for their strict and religious upbringing. Joshua had a high IQ, but struggled in school, prompting his parents to decide that homeschooling was a better option. During his trial, Joshua revealed that he had been sexually abused by a cousin in his childhood, but his family chose not to address the issue. This traumatic experience contributed to the development of his rebellious personality. At the age of 14, Joshua was accused of abusing his sister. Around the same time, he committed his first burglary. In 2002, he was arrested for 18 charges of burglary and resulting in a 9-year prison sentence. During the trial, he gave a chilling confession, revealing that he enjoyed invading other people's private space, enjoyed the feeling of being close to them while they slept, and found particular satisfaction in making others feel insecure. Released on parole in 2007 at the age of 27, officials deemed Joshua a danger to society, describing him as a perverted individual and disturbing behavior. Despite these warnings, the jury declared him fit for release. Following his release, Joshua stayed in a residence for ex-convicts, where he met his accomplice, Stephen Hayes. Hayes had spent a significant portion of his life in prison, starting with his first incarceration at the age of 16 in 1980. He was frequently arrested for violent robbery and burglary, and after being sentenced in 2004, he was granted parole in 2006, which led him to the same halfway house where he met Joshua. On July 22, 2007, Joshua trailed Michaela Petit and her mother as they traveled to a nearby market to purchase. He paid close attention to and noted specific details about Michaela's vehicle, facial features, and blonde hair. After completing their shopping, Michaela and her mother returned home, having no knowledge that Joshua had been following them. Later, Hayes sent Joshua a text message indicating he was impatient to start and needed a drink soon. Hayes asked if their plan was still on, to which Joshua confirmed to be yes. When Hayes asked how much longer he had to wait, Joshua told him he was busy putting his child to bed and advised Hayes to be patient. Hayes responded by expressing his eagerness to proceed. Meanwhile, Joshua secretly follows the Petit family in his car to find out the exact location of their house. The whole family was enjoying a nice dinner together, but they unaware that it would be the last time they would all be together. Later that night, while everyone was asleep except for William Petit, who had dozed off in the living room, their peace was disrupted by strange noises inside the house. William remembered feeling groggy, in pain, and unable to think clearly. Joshua and Hayes had entered the house through an unlocked door, initially planning to rob the family. However, upon finding a baseball bat, they used it to brutally beat William, who remained conscious despite the assault. One of the intruders threatened to shoot him if he moved. William was then restrained with ropes, tied to a pole in the basement. Joshua and Haley proceeded upstairs to Haley's room, where they found her sleeping. They tied Haley and Michaela to their bedposts, covering their heads with pillowcases. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Jennifer Petit had fallen asleep, but was soon woken up by Joshua and Hayes. They controlled Jennifer by tying her hands and feet, feeling that they now had control of the house. Joshua and Hayes then took their time to thoroughly inspect the house, and even stopped to smoke cigarettes in the living room. After collecting valuables such as jewelry, cash, Joshua and Hayes decided it was time to leave. It seemed the Petit family's ordeal was finally over as they heard the burglars leave the house. However, their nightmare was far from over. Joshua and Hayes sold the items at a pawn shop, but after realizing they hadn't made as much money as they expected, their greed drove them to return to the house. When they returned to the Petit house, they discovered a check register with $40,000 and decided to steal a total of $155,000. Once back, they informed Jennifer of their plan, threatening to kill her entire family if she didn't comply. Desperate and prioritizing her daughter's safety, Jennifer reluctantly agreed to accompany Hayes to the bank the next morning. Meanwhile, Joshua took advantage of Jennifer's absence to enter Michaela's room. He untied Michaela, undressed her, and took photos with his cell phone. He assaulted her, recording the act. Afterward, Joshua took her to the bathroom to clean her, aiming to eliminate any DNA evidence. He ordered her to put her pajamas back on and tied her up again. The evidence that Joshua raped Michaela was found during her autopsy. State Medical Examiner Dr. Wayne Carver discovered Joshua's DNA in Michaela's body. At the bank, everything initially seemed to go smoothly. However, Hayes failed to notice Jennifer's actions while she was in line. Before approaching the teller, Jennifer wrote a note on a flyer asking for help. The note read that her name was Jennifer Petit, she needed to withdraw $115,000 from her savings account, and that her family was in danger, so Jennifer asked them to call the police, or her family would be killed. The teller gave Jennifer the money despite her lack of identification. With the cash, Jennifer left the bank and returned to the car with Hayes. The bank employee immediately called the police to report the incident. However, the manager told the 911 dispatcher that Jennifer had indicated the home invaders were being nice and only wanted money. Cheshire police received a report from the bank and they set up a vehicle perimeter around the area without alerting the suspect. From a distance, the police observed the situation without intervening. Meanwhile, back at the house, Joshua told his accomplice about his actions towards Michaela, implying that he could easily harm Jennifer as well. Hayes then grabbed Jennifer, pinned her to the ground, and started removing her clothes. William heard his wife being assaulted upstairs and managed to flee. One of the intruders responded, "Don't worry, it's all going to be over in a couple of minutes." William crawled to the basement stairs and eventually made it to the backyard. William thought the intruders would shoot them all soon, so he knew he had to act fast. Joshua checked on William but found he had escaped. According to Hayes' confession, Joshua told Hayes that William had gotten away while Hayes was raping Jennifer in the living room. Upon hearing this, Hayes strangled Jennifer to death while continuing to assault her. Shortly after, they heard William shouting for help. A neighbor, who initially didn't recognize William due to his injuries, immediately called 911. Realizing the police would arrive soon, Joshua and Hayes tried to eliminate evidence. Hayes and Joshua doused Jennifer's lifeless body, various parts of the house including Michaela and Haley's bedroom, and also Michaela and Haley themselves with gasoline. Hayes and Joshua started a fire at the scene, unaware that the police had blocked off the area just a few miles away. Within 5 minutes, they collided with a police vehicle and were surrounded by officers. The two perpetrators, Joshua and Hayes, who were later identified as ex-convicts, were pulled from their vehicle and arrested. Meanwhile, the fire at the house was spreading rapidly. An ambulance arrived and took William Petit, was seriously injured, to the nearest hospital. Firefighters soon followed and attempted to put out the blaze. Once the fire was extinguished, they discovered a horrific scene inside the house. The first body they found was Jennifer's, which was badly charred and had rope around her ankles. On the second floor, they found Michaela tied to her bed. Her body completely consumed by the fire. In a desperate bid to escape, Haley had managed to break free restraints but collapsed just a few meters away due to smoke inhalation. William had also managed to free himself and crawled to a neighbor's yard for help, but the neighbor didn't initially recognize him due to the severity of his injuries. Both Joshua and Hayes admitted to the murders during questioning. Detectives noticed that Hayes smelled of gasoline throughout her interrogation. However, each attacker claimed the other was the main person responsible for planning the home invasion. Joshua also accused William of being responsible for the murders. In his diary, Joshua referred to William as a coward, stating that William had the opportunity to save his family but chose not to. The trial of Hayes started on September 13, 2010, with a jury of 12 people, consisting of 7 women and 5 men. The defense team argued that Joshua was the mastermind behind the crime and was responsible for making it more brutal. On the other hand, the prosecutors believed that both Hayes and Joshua were equally responsible. After about 5 hours of discussion, the jury found Hayes guilty on October 5. The sentencing phase began on October 18, but the jury was initially torn between recommending life imprisonment or the death penalty. Hayes' defense team argued that life imprisonment without parole would be a harsher punishment. However, on November 8, the jury decided to recommend the death sentence for Hayes. Before the trial, Hayes had tried to negotiate a plea bargain for a life sentence, but the prosecutors wanted the death penalty. On December 2, 2010, Hayes apologized for the pain he caused the Petit family. He stated that death would be a welcome relief and hoped it would bring some peace to those he hurt. Judge John Blue sentenced Hayes to 6 death sentences and 106 additional years for other crimes. However, when Connecticut abolished capital punishment in 2015, Hayes' death sentence was changed to life imprisonment. The trial of Joshua Komisarjevsky began on September 19, 2011. His lawyers offered a guilty plea in exchange for a life sentence, but prosecutors sought the death penalty. They argued that Hayes was the one who directed Joshua. Joshua was found guilty on October 13, 2011, and the jury recommended the death penalty on December 9, 2011. During Joshua's sentencing, he expressed remorse and shame for the crime, claiming he never intended to kill anyone. The judge set an execution date of July 20, 2012, holding Joshua accountable for his actions. However, in August 2015, his death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment after Connecticut abolished capital punishment. William Petit, the lone survivor of his family, was released from the hospital after 4 days. Upon his discharge, he immediately attended the funeral service for his wife and daughters. Overwhelmed with guilt and grief, William struggled to come to terms with the devastating reality that his loved ones were truly gone forever. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Marta del Castillo. Marta del Castillo was born on June 19, 1991, in Seville, Spain, to parents Eva Casanova and Antonio del Castillo. At the age of 17, Marta was a normal high school student like everyone else, then her life changed completely. On January 24, 2009, Marta was in the middle of a conversation with her best friend, Sylvia Fernandez. She abruptly ended the conversation, explaining that she had to leave quickly because her boyfriend, Miguel Carcano, was waiting for her downstairs. Marta told Sylvia that she needed to talk to Miguel to clear up some issues in their relationship and promised to fill her in on everything when she returned. Marta ran into her father in the hallway and he advised her against getting on Miguel's motorcycle. In response, Marta just gave her father a light kiss on the cheek. She left her home at 5:30 p.m., and as the hours passed and she failed to return, her family started to worry. Marta's mother reached out to several people, and they all gave the same answer: Marta was probably with Miguel, who would likely know where she was. However, when they tried to contact Miguel, he didn't answer their calls. As a result, Marta's father decided to visit Miguel's house. Despite ringing the doorbell multiple times, no one answered the door. They eventually got in touch with Samuel Benitez, a close friend of Miguel's who claimed to have seen Marta that night. According to Samuel, Miguel dropped Marta off at his house at midnight, which was plausible considering it was only 11:45. Marta's family became more worried, and at 2 a.m. that morning, they reported her missing to the police. At that point, they had no idea that Marta's disappearance would become one of the most highly publicized cases in the country's history. 4 hours after Marta's disappearance was reported, the police identified Miguel Carcano, Marta's boyfriend, as a suspect. Despite this, a third report was filed at 1:30 p.m. But the authorities failed to take immediate action. The family grew increasingly frustrated with the delay. However, 17 hours after the initial request for help, the police initiated a search for Marta. As time went by, Marta's family took matters into their own hands and started collecting statements from Marta's relatives and friends. They also organized a press conference on January 27, 2009, and initiated a campaign to find her. A large protest took place in Seville the day after Marta's disappearance, with 2,000 people demanding her safe return under the slogan, "We are all Marta." A second demonstration on February 7 drew around 3,000 people, and the case received widespread media attention. After 21 days of searching, the police finally found Miguel Carcano on February 13. The 20-year-old confessed to Marta's murder and revealed that he had dumped her body into the Guave River near his apartment. However, he claimed he did not act alone and implicated Samuel Benitez as an accomplice in disposing of the body. Samuel accepted responsibility for his role in the crime. Further investigation led to the identification of additional accomplices, including Francisco Javier Garcia Marin, aka El Cuco, a troubled minor, Francisco Delgado, Carcano's brother, and Maria Garcia, Francisco Delgado's girlfriend. All 5 suspects were arrested and interrogated, but their statements were inconsistent. Meanwhile, a thorough search for Marta's body in the river began. On February 16, Miguel repeated his statement to a judge claiming he had only admitted to the crime due to police pressure and was not involved in Marta's murder. Miguel Carcano changed his testimony on March 18, claiming that he and El Cuco had violated Marta with a knife before strangling her. He then took Marta's body to Delgado's house and disposed of it in a garbage container. However, Marta's father accused Delgado's girlfriend, Maria Garcia, and theorized that Marta's body may have been destroyed, as Maria Garcia's father worked at a biological waste crematorium. Despite this theory gaining media attention, the police continued searching for Marta's body. On November 16, 2009, El Cuco was moved to a supervised apartment because he had exceeded the maximum time allowed for confinement. He was awaiting trial, which took place in February 2011. El Cuco was acquitted of abuse and murder charges due to insufficient evidence, but was sentenced to 2 years and 11 months in a juvenile detention center for covering up for Miguel. The trial for the 4 defendants Miguel, Samuel, Delgado, Maria Garcia involved in the case began on October 17, 2011. During the trial, Miguel Carcano admitted to hitting Marta with an ashtray during a heated argument, which led to her death. He also revealed that his previous statements about abusing Marta were false. The investigation revealed inconsistencies in the stories told by Delgado, Maria Garcia, and Samuel. They claimed to have no knowledge of Marta's whereabouts after her death. They alleged that Miguel fabricated the entire story to reduce his guilt. However, forensic analysis uncovered incriminating evidence. On November 22, 2011, the forensic police discovered traces of Marta's blood on Miguel's jacket. A mix of Miguel DNA and Maria Garcia's DNA was also found on a roll of fabric tape. Additionally, a DNA match from Delgado and Maria Garcia was detected on an extension cable, believed to have been used to strangle Marta. This was surprising, given the accused had consistently maintained they had only been at the crime scene early in the morning and had no knowledge of the incident. When confronted with the new evidence, Maria Garcia was accused of violating Marta's body in attempting to cover up the crime. A detailed analysis of the crime scene revealed up to 5 fingerprints on 3 alcohol bottles, with one belonging to El Cuco. As the investigation drew to a close, the 4 suspects were under intense scrutiny from the public. Their trials were heavily guarded by the police, and the prosecution presented a substantial case against Miguel, Samuel, Delgado, and Maria Garcia. The trial involved 90 witnesses, including national police officers and experts. The prosecution also presented 30,000 pH monitorings, crime scene photographs, DNA evidence, and other items found at the house on Leon 13. The trial sparked a massive public outcry, drawing large crowds that pushed against the police barrier. The public requested to view Marta's body and also wanted to catch a glimpse of Miguel, the accused. Despite Delgado and Maria Garcia attempting to conceal themselves with hats and sunglasses, however, they were still unable to escape the crowd's attention. A woman approached them, shouting insults, while others tried to remove their sunglasses and pushed them forward, forcing them to reveal their faces to the surrounding crowd. During the trial, El Cuco's mother gave an interview with her face covered, insisting on her son's innocence and stating that neither she nor El Cuco had any knowledge about Marta's body. Despite being labeled a liar by journalists, she received 10,000 euros for the interview. A key witness then came forward, a taxi driver who had given Delgado a ride on the night of the crime. The driver explained that he had been extra cautious with his passengers, as a colleague had been murdered recently. He recalled picking up a bald, bearded man matching Delgado's description, who had a plastic bag and stared at him intently. The driver stated that he dropped Delgado off on Leon's 13th Street, exactly where the crime took place, and charged him €8 for the ride. However, Delgado's defense lawyer questioned the driver's statement, pointing out that the fare for the 2-kilometer ride should have been €5, not €8, which cast doubt on the driver's testimony. Marta's parents took the stand and described the immense pain they were experiencing due to the situation. They had to quit their jobs, start taking psychiatric medication, and even develop depression. Their other 2 daughters, Marta's sisters, were also going through a terrible time. The jury's verdict in January 2012 did not bring the family the satisfaction they were hoping for. Miguel was the only person responsible for Marta's murder and was sentenced to 21 years and 3 months in prison. Additionally, he was banned from living in the city where Marta's family resides for the next 30 years. He to pay part of the trial costs and compensate Marta's parents with 280,000 euros for the moral damage caused by her murder and disappearance. Each of her sisters was also awarded 30,000 euros. In contrast, Delgado and Samuel were released due to lack of evidence placing them at the crime scene at the time of the murder. However, the following year, they demanded that Marta's family pay for the trial costs, adding to the family's distress. Marta's father expressed his intention to seek justice beyond Spain's borders, as he believed the country's system was outdated. He even considered taking Marta's case to Strasbourg, home to the European Parliament and the European Court of Human Rights. In December 2011, Marta's mother wrote a heartfelt letter to Miguel, who was in prison at the time. She asks him to return Marta's body so they can end the long suffering they have endured. She longed to give Marta a proper burial, where she could visit her, bring flowers, and talk to her. Unfortunately, the letter went unanswered. On January 24, 2012, 3 years after Marta's disappearance, demonstrations took place in various Spanish cities and towns, demanding justice for the young girl. As a result, Miguel faced threats from fellow inmates and attempted to take his own life. He was then transferred to a specialized therapy unit where he had limited contact with the outside world, including no visitors or phone calls. During his imprisonment, Miguel created multiple versions of the crime, with as many as 7 different accounts. This led to several lawyers withdrawing from his case due to inconsistencies. In his latest testimony, presented in 2013, he implicated someone close to him as the perpetrator of the crime. Miguel described an argument between him and his brother, Delgado, over the mortgage for their house at Leon 13. The dispute began when Miguel sent a letter to the family stating that he no longer wanted to cover for Delgado. Miguel stated that a disagreement over a fraudulent loan led to a physical confrontation. The situation became violent and Delgado allegedly threatened his younger brother with a weapon. When Marta intervened, she was fatally struck with the butt of Delgado's gun. After the incident, Delgado made a phone call, but the recipient and the content of the conversation are unknown. Delgado then left the house, leaving Marta's lifeless body behind. El Cuco arrived, and Delgado asked for his help in disposing of the body. They used a wheelchair to transport the body to the Mahala farm in Laneda, where they buried it. Marta. At first, Marta's parents believed Miguel's story and were grateful to him for telling the truth. They requested that the investigation be reopened, this time focusing on Delgado. However, the prosecution and the judge did not find Marta's statements credible. Marta's father visited Miguel in prison, asking for his cooperation in finding Marta's body. In exchange for Miguel's help, Marta's father offered him a deal. Upon his release from prison, he would give Miguel the house located at Lawn 13, which he had previously purchased. The search for Marta's body became one of the most expensive in the country's history, involving extensive land and sea searches. It seemed impossible for Miguel, Samuel, and another person to transport Marta's body on a motorcycle without incident. During the reenactment, the body fell off the moment the engine started. After Miguel claimed that the body was thrown into a trash bin, the search shifted to the local landfill, which receives all the area's waste. In order to find any relevant clues, the search team estimated that they would need to remove approximately 40,000 tons of waste from the landfill due to the large amount of time that had passed since Marta's disappearance and the massive amount of waste at the landfill. The search for Marta's body lasted 32 days but was unsuccessful. Miguel, the accused, gave investigators 4 different locations where evidence might be found, leading to multiple new searches. However, the searches were hindered by a lack of funds, and at one point, the then Interior Minister Alfredo Perez had to pause the search due to financial constraints. In April 2013, Miguel pointed to Delgado as the real murderer and provided another location where Marta's body could be found, this time near the city of Link, Canada. Despite having lost credibility due to his previous false versions, a new search was conducted. Miguel went with the police to the area and gave them a general idea of where he claimed to have buried Marta's body in 2009, along with Delgado. The police excavated the soil of 6 farms, focusing on areas with recent earth movements. A total area of 10,000 square meters was scanned, but unfortunately, nothing was found. All the searches were unsuccessful, and at the request of Marta's parents. The search was halted until 2015. The public ministry requested that the defendants compensate the Ministry of the Interior for the costs incurred during the search, amounting to $66,329. In a new development, an individual named Oscar, who claimed to be a criminal, approached El Cuco's, Rosalia's mother, and pretended to seek a confession. However, his actual intention was to infiltrate and secretly gather information. Over time, Oscar and Rosalia developed a close relationship, meeting every 2 or 3 days and speaking daily on the phone. Rosalia trusted Oscar enough to give him the keys to her house, and they shared secrets and took long walks on the beach together. He gained her trust and affection. Oscar even convinced Rosalia that they would leave the country together once her son's, El Cuco situation was resolved. Meanwhile, Oscar secretly recorded 600 hours of conversations between Rosalia and those around her over a period of 2.5 years. In October 2011, El Cuco was granted temporary release from the juvenile center, where he was being held for covering up for Miguel. During one conversation, Oscar asked El Cuco if he thought the police were following him. El Cuco replied that were, and that the police were trying to find out where they had hidden Marta. This statement incriminated El Cuco and revealed his involvement in Marta's disappearance. Realizing his mistake, El Cuco quickly tried to retract his statement, claiming he had done nothing wrong. Oscar played along as if he hadn't noticed. However, in other recordings, El Cuco made fun of the police's efforts to find the body, and Rosalia criticized the investigators for not examining her phone records closely. Although Oscar worked diligently to record conversations, the 600 hours of recorded material was not presented as evidence in court. It wasn't until 13 years after Marta's disappearance, in 2022, that the recordings led to results. On May 26, 2022, a large crowd of mostly neighbors from Marta's family gathered outside the courthouse to demonstrate their support for a new trial. Rosalia and El Cuco arrived at the courthouse, protected by police. El Cuco was fully covered, wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, gloves, and a mask. Rosalia wore sunglasses, a mask, and a headscarf. In 2011, El Cuco claimed he wasn't at the scene of the crime on Lyon 13th Street. El Cuco said he had gone home around 11:30 p.m. with friends and met his mother's partner, Oscar, who was taking out the trash. Oscar then went upstairs to his apartment and stayed there for the rest of the night. Rosalia claimed she had gone out for drinks with Oscar around 11:30 p.m. and returned home around 1:30 a.m. on January 25th, finding her son asleep. El Cuco admitted that on January 24th, Miguel contacted him for assistance after killing Marta. Miguel requested his help in burying Marta's body, along with Samuel. They used Rosalia's vehicle to travel to Lyon 13, where Delgado is also there. During this time, Rosalia, El Cuco's mother, stayed at a bar until 4:30 in the morning. Upon returning home, she found her son missing. In the end, El Cuco and Rosalia were charged with perjury for hindering prosecution. As a result, El Cuco and Rosalia were sentenced to 2.5 years in prison on June 9, 2022. The judge also imposed a fine of €1,144 on each of them, as well as ordering them to pay €30,000 in civil liability to Marta's parents. Despite the sentencing and fines, Marta's parents were more concerned with finding their daughter's body than seeking monetary compensation. In the same year, the investigative judge allowed an expert to access the mobile phones of Miguel and Marta. Notably, Miguel gave his consent for his phone to be examined, believing it would reveal evidence pointing to Delgado as the actual perpetrator. The primary objective of the investigation was to locate Marta's body, which remained missing. 13 years after Marta's murder, the civil court decided to close the investigation into the search for her body in November 2022. The court declared the investigation period had expired because no new significant evidence had been found. Marta's parents eventually accepted that Miguel would never disclose the location of their daughter's body. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Lori Vallow. Chad Daybell was born on August 11, 1968, in Provo, Utah, a small town 18 miles south of Salt Lake City. He grew up in a humble family and was a quiet, shy child. In school, Chad was an average student with no standout talents or athletic skills, and he often felt self-conscious about his weight. After graduating from high school, Chad enrolled at Brigham Young University, BYU, in Utah, overcoming several challenges to do so. He got a bachelor's degree in journalism in 1992. While in college, he married a woman named Tammy. The couple quickly had 5 children, 3 sons, Seth, Mark, and G, and 2 daughters, Emma and Leah. After completing his education, Chad worked as an editor for a local newspaper. To support his family through financial difficulties, he also took on jobs as a night watchman at a church and as a gravedigger at a nearby cemetery. Since Tammy focused on homemaking and raising their children, the family struggled to make ends meet. Chad then decided to use his journalism education to write a religious-themed book. He published his first work in 1999, which was a collection of religious stories and fantasy elements. To his surprise, the book became quite popular and earned him a big income. As a result, Chad quit his jobs at the cemetery and the newspaper to pursue writing full-time. About a year and a half later, he released another book titled 1 Foot in the Grave. This book was a science work in which he shared his experiences as a gravedigger and explored themes of death, the afterlife, and soul reincarnation. In 2004, Chad established his own publishing company, Spring Creek, to self-publish his writings. His works focused on views about the approaching end of the world and Judgment Day. Over time, some people noted that Chad's religious beliefs seemed to grow more intense. He published numerous fiction and popular science books that included religious themes. Additionally, he began hosting podcasts and creating audio and video sermons to help people prepare for the second coming of Christ. Chad referred to himself as an apocalyptic writer and claimed to have visions of the future, hear voices from the deceased, and receive unique prophecies. Lori Vallow was born on June 26, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. Growing up in a large family, she had 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked hard to support their children. From a young age, Lori was especially close to her older brother Alex, who was protective of her. During her school years, Lori was recognized as a true beauty and had many admirers. She was a charismatic blonde with a slender figure and an engaging smile, enjoying the spotlight and embodying a spirited, adventurous personality. In the spring of 1992, 18-year-old Lori married Nelson Yanes, with whom she had started dating during her senior year. However, they soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were unprepared for family life, resulting in their divorce less than a year later. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to William Leah. A year later, they welcomed a son named Colby, but their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years after his birth. In early 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan, who adopted her son from her previous marriage, Colby. A year later, they had a daughter named Tylee, but their marriage ended in 2005. After the divorce, an incident occurred when Joseph came to visit the children. Lori's brother, Alex, attacked him, stating in court that he was protecting his sister's honor because Joseph had insulted her. Consequently, Alex was fined and received a short prison sentence. Lori married Charles shortly after divorcing her 3rd husband, Joseph. They got married in February 2006, and Charles is 17 years older than Lori. Despite the age difference, it did not affect their relationship. Charles had been married before and had 2 teenage sons, Zachary and Nicholas, from those relationships. Lori and Charles lived in Nevada with Lori's children from her previous marriages, while Charles's sons would visit on holidays and weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income for his family. Lori, who had not pursued further education, did not work, but Charles never criticized her for it. In 2014, the couple officially adopted a young boy named Joshua Jackson, also known as J.J. Vallow, who was Charles's grandnephew. J.J. had autism and needed expensive therapy, which his relatives could afford. Towards the end of 2014, the family Charles decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to Kauai. At that time, Zachary, Nicholas, and Colby were already adults living on their own, so the Charles family moved as a group of four: Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. The family Charles moved to a well-known tourist destination and decided to open a beach bar that focused on fresh juices, smoothies, refreshing drinks, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their hard work and Charles's background in business, but the bar quickly failed due to strong competition. During this period, Lori an interest in religious literature, particularly a book series called Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She became so fascinated by the writer's Chad ideas that she became almost obsessed, buying all his books and reading them every day. In 2016, the family Charles had to leave Hawaii and move back to the mainland, settling in Arizona. While Charles worked diligently to support the family, his wife, Lori, became more engrossed in her religious beliefs, becoming disconnected from reality. In October 2018, Lori and her close friend Melanie went to an event titled Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ, which was hosted by Chad in a nearby town. Excited to meet Chad, whom she admired greatly, Lori sat in the front row, completely focused on him, and Chad also noticed her attractive appearance. After the event, the writer Chad and religious speaker decided to personally exchange with his readers. While Lori, as expected, remained behind. She listened intently and asked if she could touch his hand. After she did, Chad looked into her eyes and revealed that they had been husband and wife in 7 previous lives. Lori and Chad exchanged contact information and began talking every day. A few weeks later, while Charles, Lori's husband, was away in Nevada for work, she invited Chad to host a gathering at her home. On that day, around 12 people gathered at the Lori house to discuss God, Judgment Day, and the Second Coming. Lori and Chad decided to work together to prepare people for the impending judgment. They started hosting podcasts about this event, delivering sermons, and writing articles. As time went on, Lori became more disconnected from reality in her family, but Charles did not notice this change right away. He believed it was just a temporary obsession that would eventually fade. By the time he recognized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Lori began to speak about dark spirits and zombies, claiming to her family and friends that she had been chosen by God for a special mission. This mission included the task of defeating the spirits of darkness, demons, and all evil. Charles's efforts to help his wife return to reality were unsuccessful, and she increasingly viewed him as a dark force that needed to be eliminated. By the end of 2018, Charles and Lori's marriage was nearing its end. In February 2019, while Charles was away on a week-long business trip, Lori replaced all the locks in their home. When he returned, Charles found himself locked out, noticed that both his car and the family truck were gone, and realized that $35,000 had been withdrawn from his bank account. Charles shouted for his wife and attempted to enter their home. In a chaotic manner, Lori rushed outside, shouting threats and insults. She yelled that his true self was gone and that a demon had taken over his body. Without hesitation, Charles went to the police station to report Lori for stealing from him and blocking his access to their home and children. He was worried that Lori had threatened to harm him, so he requested a protective order to keep Lori away from him. That evening, Charles's statements were documented as part of standard procedure. He mentioned his wife's intense religious beliefs, her expectation of an imminent apocalypse, and the tendency to categorize people into 2 groups, either light or demonic beings. Although the officers mocked him while asking questions, they still issued a protective order. The following day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. Charles's lawyer explained that he was worried about the well-being of JJ, who needed special care. He believed that his mother and sister would responsibly manage the insurance money and care for JJ if anything happened to him. A few months later, Charles made the critical error of rescind the restraining order against Lori. Charles wanted to reconcile with Lori and save their marriage. So he started visiting her home. He missed the children and hoped for the family to come back together. On July 11, 2019, when he arrived to see his children, he was shot twice in the chest and died. Lori's brother, Alex, called emergency services to report the shooting and admitted to pulling the trigger. He claimed he acted in self-defense, stating that Charles attacked him first with a baseball bat. In response, he pulled out a pistol and fired 2 shots at Charles. The incident was witnessed by the homeowner and the children, and their accounts of what happened were mostly similar. The court determined that the incident was an accidental killing that occurred in self-defense. Although Charles had the potential to cause serious harm with a bat due to his history as a former baseball player, Alex's head injury was minor. On the same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori hosted a party at their home, complete with music, many guests, and a disco by the pool, right where her husband had been shot and where blood was still visible. She did not organize a funeral or inform anyone about what happened. A week after Charles died, his son, mother, sister and other family members discovered the incident when they learned that his body had not yet been claimed at the morgue. After Charles's death, a series of mysterious disappearances and deaths occurred. Lori sold their home in Arizona and moved with her children to Rexburg, Idaho, near Chad and Tammy, who lived in the area. Lori's brother, Alex, also moved in with them to the same housing complex. Lori's 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend school and was rarely seen outside. This led many neighbors to be unaware of Tylee's existence. At the same time, Lori described her daughter as a dark entity during a phone call with a friend. On September 8, 2019, Tylee, Lori, and Alex visited Yellowstone Park, where were joined by Chad. Although several photographs from this trip feature Tylee, she was never seen alive again after that day. On September 24, Lori withdrew JJ's records from school, stating he would be homeschooled. Following this, JJ, 7-year-old boy, was also not seen again. Less than a month later, on October 19, Chad's 49-year-old wife Tammy died unexpectedly. Chad claimed she had a cold and cough. She likely passed away from respiratory failure during her sleep, showing no signs of foul play. Her death was classified as natural. Interestingly, Chad refused to allow an autopsy to confirm the cause of death, a choice that raised no suspicions. After Tammy unexpectedly passed away, Chad received nearly $500,000 from her insurance policy. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori went to Hawaii and got married in a ceremony by the beach. This surprised Chad's children, people who are still grieving the loss of their mothers and found it hard to understand their father's decision. When they returned to Arizona, Chad and Lori lived together and misled others by stating that Lori's children were staying with relatives or claiming she had no children at all. They also rented a small storage unit nearby and moved all the children's belongings there, as if they had never existed in their home. On December 12, 2019, Alex passed away unexpectedly at home. Although it seemed he died from a heart attack, so his death was classified as natural. As time went on, many people began to ask Lori about her children's whereabouts. While she was able to deceive neighbors and friends, it was more challenging to maintain her lies in front of family members. Colby, Lori's eldest son, had limited contact with his mother after he moved away. He made a real effort to contact his younger sister, Tylee. At first, Lori answered the calls using her daughter's phone, pretending to be Tylee. However, Colby quickly realized that something was wrong. Meanwhile, Charles's family wanted to see JJ. They requested to take him for holidays or weekends, or just wanted to chat with him on the phone, but Lori always refused or came up with strange excuses. Eventually, JJ's grandmother reported him missing to the police. Shortly after, Colby also went to the police to help find his younger sister, Tylee. When police officers visited Lori's home and requested to speak with her children, she falsely claimed they were with relatives. This turned out to be untrue, so the police returned to her house. They gave Lori a week to bring the children to the station, but instead, she and Chad escaped to Hawaii. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was arrested on Kauai and brought back to Arizona. A search of her and Chad's home was conducted, but there were no signs of the children or evidence that they had ever been there. Chad, her husband, who had been defending her by claiming she had no children, soon became a suspect himself. On June 9th, police found human remains buried in their backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Tylee and her younger brother, JJ. Chad was quickly arrested for hiding evidence and being an accomplice. Authorities then chose to exhume the bodies of Tammy and Alex to determine how they died. In both cases, they discovered traces of chemicals that could cause heart failure, indicating that these individuals did not die of natural causes. The trial of Lori and Chad began in January 2021. They were charged with conspiring to commit serious crimes, committing fraud through grand theft, and engaging in insurance fraud. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding Charles's death were changed from self-defense to premeditated murder. During the trial, witnesses testified that Lori described her children as dark entities and claimed she could save their souls. There were concerns that the deaths of 16 years old, Tylee, and 7 years old, JJ, may have involved ritualistic practices. Notably, Tylee's body was found partially burned, and weeks before that, Chad sent Lori a People review email in which he rated Tylee as a level 2 dark soul. Due to the serious charges against Lori and Chad, there was a possibility of capital punishment. However, in May 2021, Lori's defense team successfully argued that she was incompetent, which paused the trial. Meanwhile, all 5 of Chad's adult children maintained their father's innocence, stating that he was framed by Lori and Alex. In 2022, after receiving treatment in a psychiatric facility, Lori was found competent to stand trial and face her charges. In March 2023, the judge decided that Lori Vallow would not receive the death penalty, a ruling that the prosecution is currently trying to appeal. Later, in July 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, on May 30, 2023, Chad Daybell was convicted of first-degree murder of his first wife, Tammy, and Lori's 2 children, Joshua, JJ, Vallow, and Tylee, as well as conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Chad Daybell then was sentenced to death on June 1, 2024. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Farquharson family. At around 8 p.m. on September 4, 2005, a man emerged from the water near Lake Victoria in Australia, soaked and distressed. He flagged down a passing car, desperately seeking help. The man said that the car he was in, carrying 3 children, had crashed into a fence and fallen into the water. The man was later identified as Robert Farquharson, the children's father. Inside the submerged car were his 2-year-old son Bailey, 7-year-old Tyler, and 10-year-old Jai. Robert asked the driver to take him to the children's mother, who lived 8 kilometers from the lake. The driver complied and called emergency services at 000 to report the accident during the journey. As word spread, people flocked to the scene and some even dove into the water, hoping to rescue the children, but their efforts were futile. The car remained submerged and unreachable. Eventually, police, medical personnel, and rescuers arrived to assist. Robert explained to the police that while he had managed to escape the sinking car, he was unable to free the children, prompting him to seek help. His mobile phone had malfunctioned due to water damage, forcing him to stop a passing car for assistance. The search and rescue operation faced challenges due to darkness, and Robert could not pinpoint where the car had gone underwater. Although the water was cold, the divers continued their search for the car, aiming to help the children trapped inside. Time was critical, as the chances of survival diminished rapidly. It was essential to act quickly before the car filled with water. Around 2 a.m., divers recovered the bodies of the 3 children from the water. The car was about 30 meters from shore, submerged at a depth of 7.5 meters. Inside, the children were desperately trying to escape. They unbuckled their seatbelts, but tragically, they were unable to escape. Jai's body was found in the front door, while Tyler and Bailey were still in the back seat. Cindy, the boy's mother, was in shock after losing 3 sons in a flash. She was hospitalized and given sedatives to help her cope with her grief. Meanwhile, Robert was also hospitalized with hypothermia and minor injuries. The Farquharsons were well regarded in the community and were considered a model family. Cindy and Robert met in 1990. They welcomed their first child, Jai, in late 1994, their second, Tyler, in 1998, and eventually married in 2000. Bailey, their third child, was born 2 years later. Jai, the oldest brother, aspired to be a fireman or rescuer. On the day of the tragedy, he helped his younger brothers unbuckle their belts in an attempt to save everyone, but unfortunately, he was unable to do so. Tyler, the middle brother, is known for his playful and prankish nature, while the youngest, Bailey, is only 2 years old and is very attached to his brothers. The boy's parents had divorced several years before the tragedy. The children lived with Cindy, but Robert visited regularly and maintained open communication with them. The tragic day was also Father's Day, and the boys spent time with their father. Cindy gave Robert a set of pots and a framed photo of his sons as gifts for the occasion. Robert took the children to KFC for lunch, then they stopped at a store to buy a new baseball bat before going to their mother's house. On the way, an accident occurred. After recovering, Robert was questioned by the police. He claimed he was not speeding, but during the drive, he had a severe coughing fit that caused him to lose control of the car. The car crashed into a fence and ended up in the water, sliding several meters before starting to sink. The children in the car were screaming. Robert managed to surface to call for help and intended to go back to rescue the children, but he was unable to do so. A toxicology report found that Robert had not consumed alcohol or used illegal drugs on the day of the incident. He had just recovered from the flu and was suffering from a severe cough. Although the incident was ruled an accident, the police needed to conduct a thorough investigation. A memorial was set up on the shore of the lake, where people brought flowers, candles, and toys in memory of the children. Robert felt guilty about the accident and sought forgiveness from his ex-wife. He expressed that he tried his best to save the children but was unable to do so. His family members supported him during this difficult time, and Cindy defended Robert, believing in his innocence. She accepted that the children's deaths were a tragic accident. Forensic experts at the accident scene were puzzled by the absence of skid marks or braking marks on the road, which were expected to be present. They later found that when the car was discovered, its ignition and headlights were off, and the rear doors were locked. This raised questions. How could this have happened? could it be that the father intentionally did this instead of trying to save his children? On September 11th, Cindy and Robert were released from the hospital and were able to hold a burial for their boys. Approximately 600 people attended the ceremony, with nearly the entire community coming to offer their condolences. The local residents who supported the family during this tragic time were also mourning alongside the heartbroken parents, who were struggling to cope. Robert's car was taken for inspection to check its overall functionality, especially the brakes and steering system. There might have been a technical issue that caused the brakes to fail. Police continued their work at the lake, trying to piece together how the incident occurred and why, with the goal of making the area safer. They attempted to recreate the events using the same car, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The steering wheel did not turn far enough to the right for the car to slide into the lake. This led police to question Robert's account, and he was asked to come to the police station for further questioning. He repeated the same story but couldn't clearly explain why the car's ignition, heating, and headlights were off. There were no signs of skidding or braking on the road. Police offered him a lie detector test, which Robert agreed to, but he failed. Experts determined that reaching the water would require turning the steering wheel sharply to the right by 220 degrees. If Robert had merely lost control due to coughing, he wouldn't have made such a sudden turn. He would have just gone off the road and not into the water. All checks on the car showed it was in perfect working condition, with no issues with the brakes, steering, headlights, or ignition. Therefore, police believed the actions were deliberate. The case was referred to the Homicide Division, and a detailed investigation began. An autopsy on the boys revealed they drowned, but their bodies had numerous abrasions and bruises, suggesting they may have been injured before their deaths. 3 months later, Robert was arrested and charged with the murder of the boys. He was shocked by the accusations and insisted that he was innocent, claiming that it was a tragic accident. Soon after, a witness came forward, one of Robert's friends, who revealed that just days before the incident, Robert had expressed his desire to harm his children, then end his life as an act of revenge against his ex-wife. Because after the divorce, Cindy got everything. A nice house, a luxury car, money, and even she started dating another man and seemed happy, with plans to remarry. Robert was jealous of her, but at the time his friend did not believe he would do it. Robert later confessed to this friend that he had deliberately drowned their children as an act of revenge against his ex-wife. He was released on $200,000 bail before the trial because the judge considered the incident an accident and decided that he did not pose a threat to society. As part of his bail conditions, Robert was required to stay home and wear a tracking bracelet. The trial began in August 2007. During the trial, Robert's ex-wife Cindy expressed her belief that he did not intentionally kill their children. She characterized him as a devoted family man. Cindy found it hard to comprehend why Robert would harm their children, even if he were upset with her. However, she acknowledged that Robert had been unhappy with her new relationship and had previously said he wouldn't let the children live with her new partner or pay alimony. Cindy firmly believed that the incident was an accident. She recalled suggesting to Robert that he spend Father's Day with the children. She sent her sons off at 3 p.m., and their father picked them up, with the expectation that they would return home by 7:30 p.m. Around 8 p.m., she was shocked to find a soaked and frantic Robert at her door. After learning about the accident, Cindy's new partner, Stephen, quickly drove to the lake. He began diving in, searching for the car to rescue the children. Robert, accompanied by his lawyer, maintained that it was an accident. A local resident who was near the lake that day testified at the trial about Robert's behavior while he waited for the boys to be rescued. The witness noted that Robert seemed more focused on finding a cigarette than on his children, which surprised him. When asked why he wasn't more worried about his children, Robert did not respond and did not attempt to dive into the water to save them. Another driver who stopped to help also provided testimony. He noted that Robert did not ask him to call for help but instead wanted a ride to see his wife. By that time, Robert appeared to have accepted that the children were dead. The driver was confused because Robert wanted to see his wife instead of seeking help for the children. Although confused, the driver took Robert with him and gave him a phone to call for help. However, Robert refused, saying that it was too late and the children were dead. The driver later felt that Robert might be mentally unstable. Regretting his decision to follow Robert's wishes, the driver called the emergency services himself, wishing he had done more to save the children. A nearby police officer commented on Robert's lack of emotion, saying that he did not act like a father who had just lost 3 sons. In contrast, the children's mother appeared very confused, pulling her hair, crying and begging for help, while Robert was barely responsive. Cindy and Stephen, her new partner, joined the rescuers to help, while Robert didn't mention his cough, which he claimed had led to his loss of control, until 11 days later. During the trial, the doctor who treated Robert confirmed that Robert was indeed ill. Robert was coughing a lot and felt weak and lethargic. However, the doctor believed that the cough would not have caused Robert to turn the wheel so suddenly. After the divorce, Robert suffered from depression, mental instability, and personality disorder. He regularly saw a psychiatrist. On the morning before the tragedy, Robert told the psychiatrist that he had forgotten to take his antidepressants. The prosecution presented evidence that there were no skid marks or brake marks on the road, and that the back door was locked and the headlights were off, which could not have happened accidentally. The prosecution argued that Robert had tried to kill the children out of revenge against Cindy, primarily because he wanted to avoid paying her child support. The jury found these arguments convincing, and on October 5, 2007, they found Robert Farquharson guilty. He was sentenced to the maximum sentence of 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. In sentencing, the judge stated that Robert's actions had destroyed his entire family in revenge against Cindy and had also ruined his own life. Cindy, the children's mother, fainted after hearing the verdict and had to be rushed to the hospital because she did not expect the verdict to be like that. After the trial, she was very confused by the experts' opinions. That Robert had intentionally killed the children to get revenge on her. Cindy wanted to visit Robert in prison to understand the truth of what happened, but he refused to see her. Cindy sued her ex-husband, Robert, for pain and suffering as well as for the death of their 3 children. As a result, Robert was found guilty and ordered to pay her $225,000 Australian dollars. Later, it was discovered that the friend who testified against Robert during the trial had a history of violence and multiple convictions, which raised doubts about his credibility. With this new information, Robert and his lawyer filed an appeal, which was accepted on December 17, 2009. Robert was released on bail of $200,000 Australian dollars on December 21. Due to errors in the judicial process, a new trial was scheduled, beginning in May 2010. During the trial, a new witness testified, a woman who said she was driving behind Robert's car near the lake. She described the car as moving at a normal speed before it suddenly swerved to the right multiple times. Inside the car, she saw 3 children, and she noted that Robert was purposefully guiding his boys toward the water. He did not attempt to brake or change direction. Most notably, Robert remained calm and did not cough while sitting behind the wheel. The woman drove away quickly and did not realize that Robert had driven his car into the water. She thought he would simply stop by the lake. She later learned about the tragedy on TV the next day and came to understand that Robert had intentionally drowned his children. She had been unable to contact anyone sooner because she was receiving cancer treatment in the hospital. After witness testimony, Cindy developed a deep hatred for Robert, believing that he had intentionally taken the lives of her children. She was convinced of his guilt and asked the court to sentence him to life in prison, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Cindy had Robert's name removed from her children's records and from their gravestones. On July 22, 2010, the jury again found Robert guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In 2010, Cindy married Stephen and they had 2 sons together. Sadly, Cindy passed away in May 2022 at the age of 50. Robert remains in prison, serving his sentence. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Tracy Roberts. In 1998, the Tracy Roberts family relocated from Chicago to the small town of Early, Iowa. The couple, Tracy and Michael, were in their second marriages and each had a son from previous relationships. Tracy was American, while Michael was originally from Australia. They were seen as a respectable young family by the local community. Michael was a computer expert who ran an IT business from home, with many innovative ideas he aimed to pursue. Tracy is an active and sociable housewife who enjoys sports. The couple met online and got married just 18 days after meeting in person. They have since had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and appear to be a very happy family. Many people admired Michael's determination, including his neighbor Mona, a real estate broker with whom they had completed several successful transactions. Mona was eager to continue working with Michael. She said that her 20-year-old son, Dustin, was very private and had a hard time keeping a job. He had tried many different positions but had not been able to hold any for long. Michael suggested that help Dustin discover his strengths. Later, he began teaching Dustin the basics of business. He took him on trips and supported him in attending church. Michael was generally seen as kind, pleasant, and empathetic, while his wife was regarded as sweet and sociable. They raised 3 children together, with Tracy managing the household and children while Michael focused on work, often traveling for business. However, an unexpected situation happened to Tracy's family. On the evening of December 13, 2001, in the town of Early, Tracy was in the kitchen preparing dinner with her children. While the food was being heated, she was also bathing her 1-year-old daughter upstairs. Meanwhile, her 2 older boys, ages 3 and 11, were watching television in the older boy's bedroom. Suddenly, the boys were startled by a piercing scream from their mother. The eldest, Bert, rushed to see what was happening. He saw Tracy trying to enter the room, but someone grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back into the hallway. Holding her baby daughter, Tracy managed to hand her over to Bert before a struggle with the attacker ensued. Tracy slammed the door shut behind her, and the boys could hear the sounds of a struggle and their mother's muffled cries for help. Terrified and unsure of what to do, Bert listened as the noises escalated. Then, after a brief silence, a shot rang out. During the attack, Tracy managed to defend herself against the criminals. One was killed, and the other escaped. Bert called 911 around 7 p.m., reporting that strangers had broken into their home and attacked his mother. Police officers took the call seriously and rushed to the address. It was unclear what had happened to Tracy and her 3 children at that time. Paramedics then arrived to find the children sobbing and Tracy repeatedly shouting that an intruder was still upstairs and pointing towards the stairs. However, as per protocol, paramedics could not enter the house until police had confirmed that the house was secure. The police arrived and went up to the 2nd floor where they found a young man lying dead in a pool of blood. There was no one else in the room. Tracy was quickly placed in an ambulance by a doctor and taken to the nearest medical center. The scene revealed a shocking crime. The entire family was overwhelmed and confused by the situation. The police began an investigation to shed light on this complicated situation. The small town where the incident occurred was a quiet and peaceful community of about 500 residents, all of whom knew each other well. The police began their investigation by questioning Bert, the eldest son. Bert had witnessed an attack on his mother. The attacker had pulled her hair back. Stunned, the boy knew he had to act to protect himself and the other children, so he grabbed a baseball bat, ready to fight off anyone who entered his room. When the chaos died down, he could only hear his mother breathing heavily. Finally, he heard the voices of two men outside starting to bang on the door. In fear, the boy began to scream, trying to scare the intruders away. Outside, the men shouted about having guns, and then several shots were fired. Suddenly, his mother opened the door. Bert was relieved that it was finally over. He then called 911. After hearing about the incident, Mona rushed to the scene. She was looking for her 20-year-old son, Dustin, a family friend. His car was parked in a private driveway, but when she arrived, the entire area, including Dustin's car, was cordoned off. She was not allowed into Tracy's house. Mona asked the officers about her son's condition, but they told her that he was dead. Dustin was found lying in a pool of blood near a second-floor bedroom. Tracy had shot him during a struggle. The police did not share any further information with Mona. Tracy woke up in a hospital 20 kilometers from her home. She had injuries to her neck that suggested she had been strangled. Tracy told the police what had happened that night. While she was bathing her daughter on the second floor, she heard noises downstairs. Thinking that her husband had returned early from a business trip, she went down to check. But she discovered two men. When they started to go upstairs, Tracy quickly took her daughter to Bert's room and left the three children in the room. She then tried to enter the room and close the door, but one of the men grabbed her hair and dragged her into the hallway. Then one of the attackers used her jeans to strangle her. During the struggle, Tracy lost consciousness and the attackers lost focus. When she regained consciousness, she heard screaming outside the door. Realizing this was her chance to escape, she got up and ran to the gun safe next to the bed in the master bedroom. Although the attackers chased her, she managed to turn a few numbers and retrieve a gun. Tracy aimed at them and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened because the safety was still on. The attackers were caught off guard, allowing her to fire again after removing the safety. The loud bang stunned her, and she continued to fire at the attackers until the room filled with smoke. Tracy didn't see the criminals, but she heard someone running away from the house. One of the criminals fell, while the other managed to escape. She also heard her frightened children calling her name, so she rushed into the room and opened the door. In a moment of panic, her son swung a bat at her, trying to protect himself, and she narrowly avoided being hit. The most important thing was that the children were safe. As the smoke cleared in the main bedroom, Tracy saw Dustin, a 20-year-old, lying on the floor but still alive. He began to get up, and in her shock, she grabbed the gun and ordered him to stay down, desperate for everything to stop. She yelled at him not to move, but Dustin, who was the son of her friend Mona, didn't listen. He stood up and approached her. Worried for her and the children's safety, she fired several shots, and Dustin fell to his death. Tracy recounted that earlier that day, Dustin visited their home. When he discovered that her husband was away on a business trip, he lingered on the porch for a long time, seemingly unwilling to leave. His behavior was unusual, and Tracy ultimately had to shut the door in his face. The Tracy described a second participant in the crime as tall, with dark hair, around 30 years old, but she never saw his face. That evening, Tracy's husband, Michael, was on a business trip in Minneapolis. It was unclear why Dustin, whom Michael was helping, would attack Tracy and their children. The second killer was still at large, raising fears that he might return for revenge. This left Tracy feeling fearful, she unable to sleep because she was worried about her family's safety. The police had a hard time identifying the second suspect, based only on the vague description provided by Tracy. They began investigating Dustin's social connections to determine who might have accompanied him to Tracy's family home. Many people consider Tracy a hero. She gave many interviews to journalists. In front of the cameras, she and her husband, Michael, held hands, and she calmly said that she did what she had to do to protect her family, and the whole hall applauded. Many people thought that her actions were justified. Tracy was brave. She could protect not only herself but also her children. The police were wary of accepting anyone's testimony without evidence, so they began a thorough investigation of the events surrounding the case, finding the story unconvincing. Mona was going through the most difficult time of her life and was heartbroken. To her, the circumstances of her son's murder, as Tracy described them, were meaningless. She was haunted by nightmares of the attack that took her son's life. Mona, the mother of the young man who was shot, spoke to the media about her shock over the incident. She described Dustin as a kind person who had never shown aggression and had no criminal history. There was no reason for him to attack the Tracy family. However, Dustin had to see a psychologist with his mother. He had difficulty making friends at school, was often bullied, and was excluded from parties and celebrations. Despite seeing many doctors, they gave him different diagnoses without clear answers. Could his social difficulties lead to a moment of loss of control? Tracy told the police that she had always feared Dustin. She felt extremely unsafe, even around her husband, and she tried to avoid any encounters with Dustin. Under no circumstances would she let him be alone with the children because she believed he would harm them. Mona was shocked by these allegations. She had no idea that Tracy was facing such serious issues with her son. To Mona, everything seemed just the opposite. The police examined the crime scene and concluded that there was no clear motive for the violent attack. They suggested that it could only make sense if it had been planned as a robbery. The Tracy house contained many valuables, leading Tracy to believe that the young criminals aimed to steal cash or one of Michael's collectible weapons. However, the criminals' behavior did not resemble that of typical robbers. They ignored money and jewelry that were easily visible, and instead of trying to steal from Tracy while she was unconscious after being strangled, they focused solely on inflicting violence without any intent to sexually assault her. The police quickly identified a possible motive linked to Tracy and her husband. Not long before the home invasion, Tracy had experienced a traumatic incident. She was sexually assaulted by a dentist while under anesthesia. She regained consciousness during the assault, and the dentist attempted to silence her by promising to help her with her sexual problems and offering her $150,000 in compensation if she remained quiet. Tracy confided in her husband about this, and he urged her to report it to the police. Just 2 days after the dentist's attack on her, she was preparing to testify in court against her dentist, whom she was accusing of rape. He was likely the second person to invade her home, intending to silence her so she could not testify against him. However, police determined that the dentist had no connection to Dustin and had a solid alibi. He was at work at the time. Later, the Tracy recalled another individual who might have wanted her dead. His name was John Pittman, Tracy's first husband. They met while studying medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago. John was a fourth-year student interning at Chicago Clinical Hospital, and 19-year-old Tracy was in her first year of radiology. John was very controlling and aggressive, but Tracy was accustomed to such behavior after growing up with a domineering father, so she considered it normal. She married him, and they eventually moved to Denver, Colorado, where she gave birth to a son. As John tried to control every aspect of her life, she thought it was normal. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Tracy describes how he often abused her, especially during sex. Eventually, she grew tired of the physical violence, and they divorced. After the divorce, a custody battle began to take place. Bert revealed to his mother that his father had harassed him, leading to a contentious custody battle in court. Although there was no concrete evidence of harassment, Tracy was able to convince those present at the trial. Bert then lived with his mother. However, the long-running custody battle, which was still ongoing when the attack occurred, left John Pittman as a suspect. Even young Bert believed his father may have been involved in the attack. The police contacted John's colleagues in Virginia, where he lived, to confirm whether he had an alibi during the time of the crime. They found that he had a solid alibi. He was working at a clinic when the crime occurred. John denied any involvement and there was no evidence against him. At that time, he was a successful plastic surgeon with an excellent reputation. His acquaintances found it hard to believe that John could harm his son or kill his ex-wife, whom he had not been involved with for a long time. However, John had not been cleared yet and remained a suspect. Months passed without any progress in the case, and Tracy grew increasingly anxious. She felt unsafe knowing that the second attacker was still at large, fearing that he might return to take revenge on her. Meanwhile, the police began investigating the new suspect, Tracy's second husband, Michael. Further investigation revealed that their marriage had long since deteriorated, and the emotional connection between them had faded. Some speculated that Michael may have wanted to get rid of Tracy, a theory that received considerable support from those around them. Bert, Tracy's eldest son, revealed a disturbing truth about his stepfather. The man was very strict and often punished Bert severely for even minor infractions. Meanwhile, Tracy did not address her husband's aggressive behavior or protect her children. It is possible that Tracy had become accustomed to this type of treatment from a young age and did not realize it was a problem. Michael's behavior was noted by the police during a hospital visit where he visited his surviving relatives. His reaction seemed to be genuine shock at finding them still alive, suggesting that this outcome was not what he had wanted. Michael had a strong alibi. He was in another city on business. This was confirmed by CCTV footage. He was later given a lie detector test, but failed it and appeared to be hiding something. The police suspected he may have been involved in planning the attack. He did not inform his wife about the failed lie detector test. Tracy eventually discovered the truth about the lie detector test. Tracy became increasingly paranoid, believing that both her husband and his friend were conspiring against her to gain sole custody of their child. She shared her suspicions with the police chief, citing a dream in which Michael mentioned the plot. Tracy believed that her husband was indeed involved in the case. The police began investigating Michael and discovered that his IT business was struggling and he was in large debt. However, the couple held multi-million-dollar life insurance policies, which may have motivated Michael to eliminate Tracy to solve his financial problems. Additionally, he had a close relationship with Dustin, which may have led him to convince the young man to help him. Despite these theories, there was no concrete evidence linking Michael to any wrongdoing. Tracy and Michael's relationship became increasingly strained. In 2004, 3 years after the attack, they divorced. At the time, police had not found enough evidence to arrest Michael. After the divorce, Tracy and her children moved away. She changed her home, her job, and even her name to escape and protect herself from potential threats. Meanwhile, her friend Mona also moved to another city with her daughters. The tragedy not only affected Dustin's life, but also led to the death of his father a year later. On Thanksgiving Day 2002, Dustin's father chose to end his life at Dustin's grave. The father was devastated by his son's death, especially because of the judgmental looks from others who viewed Dustin as a dangerous criminal. Meanwhile, Mona, devastated by a series of losses, could not stop questioning what really happened the day her son arrived at Tracy's house. Mona refused to believe that he intended to hurt the people he admired. Michael's family was important to Dustin. He struggled with social interactions and felt safe and grateful to be with Michael, who understood him. The Mona intended to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Tracy Roberts to hold her accountable for Dustin's death and to uncover what happened that night. Mona lawyers launched their own investigation and discovered inconsistencies in Tracy's repeated accounts of the event. In one version, she claimed to have recognized Dustin immediately, while in another, she said she only learned his identity later. Additionally, she described shooting from different positions in her various retellings. Due to these discrepancies and the confusion surrounding the details, the lawyers concluded that her story was fabricated. On the day of the murder, Mona was busy shopping for Christmas. She called home to check if Dustin was up yet, as he had an important meeting scheduled. Her daughter answered and said that Dustin had left. She was relieved that Dustin was awake and going about his business. Later, Mona's nephew called to inform her that something had happened at Tracy's house. Mona rushed over, suspecting that Tracy and Michael had hurt each other, but she could not fathom that her son had been murdered. Mona mentioned that the day before the murder, Tracy had invited her son to her house to ask for help with something. Mona believed that this was Tracy's way of luring Dustin into a trap. She believed that Tracy was hiding something. However, no one paid attention to Mona's testimony until 7 years after the Roberts burglary. The same investigative team revisited the case and began to suspect that Tracy might not be the hero protecting her son, but a potential killer. There was no sign of forced entry or attempted robbery in the house. How could two people have broken in without leaving any evidence? Dustin had 9 gunshot wounds, indicating he had been shot at close range with no chance of survival, and there was no evidence of a second attack. The police decided to speak with Tracy's first husband, John. He described her as a monster, revealing that she had had bouts of aggression, including one time when she pointed a gun at him while threatening violence. She eventually fired a shot into the ceiling, prompting him to call the police. John discovered that Tracy was both aggressive and unfaithful. She drained their bank accounts. He even hired a private detective because he suspected she was cheating, and the detective confirmed that several of Tracy's lovers left their home while John was at work. Eventually, John filed for divorce because he began to fear Tracy. Concerned about their son growing up in such a toxic environment with an unstable mother, he fought for custody. This enraged Tracy, who tried to turn their son against John. A dentist was accused of raping Tracy during a dental appointment, but he claimed that she had been harassing him for a long time and was willing to prove it. His practice was equipped with cameras and the recordings supported his claim. It was revealed that Tracy, upon learning of this, had withdrawn her complaint against the dentist the day before the incident. Tracy's second husband, Michael, who she accused of being abusive and harassing her, denied all her allegations to police. He said Tracy was unfaithful. Michael claimed that he put up with these problems for the sake of his children but eventually decided to divorce her. He described himself as a strict father who never abused his wife and children and claimed that Tracy turned the children against him after their divorce. After the divorce, Michael moved to California to focus on his business. The Tracy seemed to slander everyone around her, presenting herself as a victim of abuse from the men in her life. However, the reality was quite the opposite. Police believed that her account of the events from December 13, 2001, was just another lie fabricated by Tracy. The police wanted to meet with Bert to gather more information, but Tracy not only moved to another state and changed her personal information, she also frequently changed her contact information. The police had to thoroughly review the entire list of evidence again. One significant item was an old computer discovered in the back seat of Dustin's car. Tracy believed this computer was crucial evidence in the robbery because it belonged to her husband. However, it was puzzling why Dustin would steal it when there were more valuable and easier to take items available in the house. Additionally, a pink notebook was found in which Dustin had written plans for the murder shortly before his death. The notes indicated that his mission included killing Tracy Roberts, and surprisingly, the person who ordered the assassination was Tracy's first husband, John. However, there was a strange detail in these notes. They contained so many specific details about events that Dustin could not have known before the attack, yet they were written in his own handwriting. It seemed that Dustin had written them under duress, possibly under threat. Dustin's mother did not recognize the pink notebook, which seemed more suited for a woman. Dustin disliked this color and would never have purchased such a notebook. He never kept diaries, and the only content in this notebook was a crime plan, which appeared unusual. It looked brand new and seemed to have been used only once for those notes. It suggested that Tracy might have given the notebook to someone to stage a crime. The latest investigation revealed that Dustin was not the attacker but Tracy's victim. It was also revealed that Tracy had been facing problems in her new town in Nebraska, where she had recently moved. She was charged with falsifying documents and false identity. 10 years after the murder, the police discovered the truth. On July 27, 2011, the police arrested Tracy. The memories of a friend who had helped Tracy clean out her house provided vital information. The friend knew about a notebook containing Dustin's confession. The police discovered that all of these statements had been recorded at Tracy's request. Police found no signs of an attack in the house. The wounds to her neck were self-inflicted, as evidenced by minor scratches that were not life-threatening. The claim that Dustin had struggled to stand up after being shot multiple times was clearly implausible. Forensic experts analyzed crime scene photographs and determined, based on blood spatter, that Dustin was still lying on the floor, with all the shots coming from above. This contradicted Tracy's version of events. The defense argued that Tracy was simply trying to protect her child. They said much of the evidence against her was circumstantial. The defense relied heavily on the testimony of Tracy's eldest son, Bert. He claimed that he heard men screaming and saw someone dragging his mother out the door. Bert also confirmed that the attacker told his mother that she was dead and warned that he would be next. He then saw a young man with a gunshot wound trying to get up, as his mother had described. However, the reliability of Bert's testimony has been questioned. Tracy initially mentioned that the nursery door was closed at the time, preventing Bert from witnessing the incident. The prosecution argued that Bert's account may have been influenced by his mother. The prosecution argued that Tracy killed Dustin to frame her husband, hoping to gain sole custody of their children and access to his money. This was considered the primary motive for the crime. That same day, Tracy confronted Dustin at gunpoint, forced him to write in a notebook, and then shot him. She then staged a scene to make it look like she had been attacked, inflicting minor injuries on herself and leaving a notebook and a computer in Dustin's car. A forensic expert later confirmed that her injuries were inconsistent with her being unconscious, further casting doubt on her testimony. After reviewing the evidence, the jury found Tracy Roberts guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tracy cried in court when she heard the verdict, but many people did not believe her tears, as they did not seem genuine. Again, she seemed to be acting. The situation was especially difficult for Bert, who was convinced that his mother had saved the lives of all her children that night and had been wrongly imprisoned. He continued to visit and support her. Years later, Tracy's second husband, Michael, with the approval of the guardianship agency, took the children back to Australia with his new wife. Tracy maintains her innocence and is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in Iowa.